What is the good word, IB Nation? Welcome to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. I'm Vince D'Addario. That guy is Brian Driscoll. And we are back. Yeah, we're back. This is my first show of the week. This is Brian's second show, and we're kind of rolling at this point with our positional breakdowns and all that fun stuff. And today we're rolling into the offensive line, Brian.
I'm fired up, man. I'm ready to go. Like, this is such. We were talking about this before the show, Vince, and I was talking about how my opinion on this line, or not my opinion, my feeling on this line, my very emotional reaction about this line really changes from week to week. And kind of as usually in over the summer, it's like I get super critical early, and then as I get close to the season, I start to get more excited about the team.
Yeah.
Well, the offensive line's been a little bit different. You know, the further away we are, the more excited about it I am. But then the closer we get to it, the more nervous I get about this unit. And we're going to explain all those reasons why. And because it's a very unique group, Vince, because if you look at it just from a pure talent standpoint, it's like, I don't understand what all the angst is about. But then when you think about what goes into being actually a good offensive line, then that's where you understand where the angst comes from.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, like, this is a very important group to how good this team is going to be. Like ESPN, where this kind of came from too, the reason we're doing it the way we're doing it today. ESPN wrote an article, and they do these things where they'll take the top 25 teams and, you know, biggest breakout or best freshman or best newcomer. And one of them was biggest concern. And sometimes it's a player, sometimes it's a position group, which is the right way to go about it. And for Notre Dame, they had wide receivers as the biggest question mark, which I don't agree with. And it was very well reasoned. So this isn't like pushback against ESPN. It's understandable. And I think there's people in the chat who probably think receivers a bigger question mark. And again, that's understandable. Just for me, I see it a little differently. I think this is the group to me that is the biggest question mark for Notre Dame. At the same time, it also is the group that you look at and say that their performance could go the furthest towards determining just how good this team could be.
Sure.
Obviously, quarterback's important, and Notre Dame can't make a title run if the quarterback position and other things aren't really good. But this group, where I look at it, Vince, is I don't think they need to be great. They just have to be good, because you can't have this group be what last year's line was, which is when they're bad, they're kryptonite to everything else. And that's exactly what happened last year. Like, Duke had a hard time covering all of Notre Dame's receivers and Mitchell Evans and those type of things, but they so thoroughly dominated the Notre Dame offensive line that it negated a lot of that.
Mm-hmm.
We saw that against Louisville. We saw that against Clemson at times, especially in the second half. And so you've got to make sure that doesn't happen again. And now you're doing it with a much less experienced group than what you had last year. And so it just makes it interesting and fascinating, Vince, and we'll dive into all those different particulars. But, you know, setting the stage, it's like this group is going to have such a big impact on how good this team can be. And this is the group that I believe has the biggest not margin, but the biggest potential
ceiling
range
to floor
of what it could be, right? Yes, because like with receivers, like I think I know they're going to be at least here based on past production. Like, it's a very experienced group of receivers. Yes, we haven't seen them all do it at Notre Dame, but they're very experienced. So they're kind of here. Well, okay, I think they could be here. Quarterback, we know where Riley Leonard's at. Okay, but can he get better? Running back, I don't care about experience. D-line, linebacker. I mean, there's all these positions where, like, Notre Dame's like every other team in college football. There's question marks about the team that you have to see get answered. That's true for Georgia, Ohio State, Bama, Texas, everybody. But this one right here, Vince, is the one where it's like, it could be down here.
Right.
It could be up here. And we don't know where it's going to be. And that's going to be part of the fun as we get through fall camp and into the season of seeing what it can be. But it also provides some of, the word I used earlier was angst about just how good it can be.
Yeah.
Because last year the group was really good some weeks and really bad other weeks and a lot of in between. Will this group be any more consistent? Will it be better? Will it be worse? We're going to find out here very soon.
Well, let's just jump into this thing, because I think another piece of the puzzle that you haven't even mentioned yet, and I think is an important piece of the puzzle, is the fact that, while you are very accurate and you're saying that this is the biggest question mark on the team, as far as you just, the margin for error is large. It's like, where are they going to end up? Could they be up here with all the talent that they have? Will they be down here because of the lack of experience? Will all the talent mesh? I mean, offensive line is all about how you mesh with the guy next to you and the other 4 guys that are on the line with you. And then there's position battles. Are they going to get the right 5 guys? So all of those questions are all legit, and we're all going to get into them. But at the end of the day, we're going to learn a lot about the coaching of this group. Joe Rudolph is coming into a pretty critical time in his tenure at Notre Dame, right? Because none of these guys have started on a regular basis. Well, they have, but maybe not in this position, definitely not as a group. So we're going to learn a lot about Joe Rudolph. Remember, we had this conversation a few years ago about Jeff Quinn and how his first year was good because he was dealing with all of Harry Hiestan's guys, and they were fundamentally sound because of the foundation that Harry Hiestan created. And so therefore the first group that he had was really good, right? Then you got a year or 2 down the road and it was like, okay, now we're going to learn who Jeff Quinn is as a coach. And we're kind of getting into that neighborhood with Joe Rudolph now, right? With this pretty much brand new line, right? As far as playing together and all of these things, this is Joe Rudolph's line now. And so what are we going to learn about Joe Rudolph? Is he the guy that we think he is or that we think he could be? You know, a lot of that has to do with how this group meshes and how they come together as a group.
Yeah. Well, I mean, these guys are all going to have been coached more by Joe Rudolph than Harry Hiestan.
Oh, yeah, right.
I mean, because Coach Hiestan was only back for a year with this group, especially with the younger players. So when I look at this, Vince, it's like, look, who is Joe Rudolph as a coach, right? Like, he did some nice things at Wisconsin. I thought he did a good job there. Don't think he did a great job there. They had some great years. They had some not so great years during his tenure. And then you have to ask yourself, and we've brought this up before, were the issues more of him as a line coach, or were more because he was trying to split duties between being the offensive line coach and the offensive coordinator?
Sure.
And, he kind of got the offensive coordinator part taken away during the end of his tenure there in Wisconsin, because not taken away, just, hired somebody else so he could focus more on being the O-line coach, right? And when you look at his tenure at Wisconsin, Vince, it was a lot of what we saw last year in a bigger, broader standpoint, and that is this is a very inconsistent group. He was there at Wisconsin from 2015 to 2021. Well, if you look at the group he inherited in 2014, he took over a team that rushed for 320 yards the year before. And in his first year, they ran for 150 yards per game. And then the next year, they jumped up over 200. And then the next year, they climbed up to 222, then up to 273. Looking good, right? Dropped down to 233, 164 in 2020. And then, up to 2010 and 2021, his last year coaching the O-line, but they were a little inconsistent that year. And if you remember correctly, they really struggled to run the ball against Notre Dame, for example, and they struggled to run the ball against some of the better teams in their schedule. So they ran for 78 against Notre Dame. They ran for 43 against Michigan. Well, they ran for $166 against Iowa, but only 3.5 yards per carry. So how did they get their numbers? They ran for 352 against Eastern Michigan, 391 against Illinois, 290 against Purdue, 305 against Rutgers, 268 against Northwestern, 252 against Nebraska. And then anytime they played a halfway decent offense, they struggled. They ran for 180 yards against Penn State. They ran about 58 times. It's only 3.1 yards per carry. So it wasn't a really a great offensive line, to be honest with you, at times. And that was kind of ended up being a little bit of the downfall for that Wisconsin team during his tenure. Was they weren't that dominant rushing team that they were in the past. Even in some of the success they did have, honestly, was due in large part that they had a star running back in Jonathan Taylor. And he had some 2,000-yard seasons, but if you look at like Jonathan Taylor's production during his career, he rushed for 2,003 yards, 2194, 1977. You're like, well, dude, that guy blocked for those guys. But let's not forget the year before Joe Rudolph got there, Melvin Gordon ran for over 2,500 yards. In the year before that, James White ran for 1,444 yards, Vince. You know what was interesting about that? He was their number 2 back. He was not their leading rusher.
Good Lord.
Because Melvin Gordon ran for over 1,600, right? Like, so that's what he walked into, and they were never as good running the ball as during his tenures, they were the 2 years before, despite having Jonathan Taylor. That's the downside. Now, the counter to that is, well, I also think part of the problem was they had a head coach who wasn't that great of a recruiter and who kind of tamped things down a little bit and made things a little bit more conservative than they should have been. Different conversation for a different day. So then you ask yourself, okay, well, the other thing is he didn't have the same kind of talent on the offensive line that he's going to have at Notre Dame. So there's all these different pulls back and forth, Vince, that, this could make a case for a reason we should be excited about what Joe Rudolph can do. This is a case that makes you say, I'm not sure how good Joe Rudolph is. This year we start to find that out, right? And we sort of saw this with Al Washington. His first year, he's got all these veteran players that were coached primarily by Mike Elston, and there wasn't the same level of buy-in to what he was trying to do. And that's often the case with veterans when a new coach comes in. Then you look at the offensive line last year, and I don't, and I think there was some of that as well. And honestly, Vince, to a degree, it's kind of understandable. When the guy that most people that are associated with offensive line view as the best to do it, the best in the business, when he kind of tells you a certain way of doing things, and then somebody else comes in and kind of says, yeah, but we're going to do things a little bit different, there's going to be an understandable level of, yeah, I'm not sure if we should not, why are we going away from what that guy did? Because what that guy did was really flipping good. And so I think there was a little bit of that struggle. Not that players were outwardly rebellious to Joe Rudolph. That's not fair to say, but there's a level of buy-in where it's like, okay, I either trust completely what you're saying to me, which Zeke Carrell, for example, would do when Harry Heastan came in, because that's who initially recruited him to Notre Dame. And then you get to the point where it's like, okay, yeah, I hear you, coach, but I'm not sure if I'm going to buy that completely because we did it differently under Coach Heastan.
Yeah.
And then the fact is that last year's offensive line, you had a lot of veterans who had literally had their third straight offensive line coach in 3 years. There just were a lot of things against him. Now you go into year two. Does his and then with the D line, Vince, they lost Isaiah Foskey, they lost Jason Adamiola, they lost Justin Adamiola. Like, they lost some key players to what they were trying to do defensively. And you fast forward to last season, Vince, and you think, wow, how's this defense? That was a position of a lot of angst for Notre Dame. We're using that word again today. It's like apparently the word of the day for me.
Just a ding.
But there was a lot of concern about from fans and from us, and about how the D line would be last year without the Adamiolas, without Jacob Lacey, without Isaiah Foskey. And you also lost Chris Smith. And you're bringing in Javante Jean-Baptiste, who's never really been anything but a backup player there. Riley Mills moves inside. Is he going to be able to handle playing inside? Howard Cross, undersized Howard Cross, as your now starter. Jordan Pizarro is going to take over for Isaiah Foskey. Like, this is a concern, right? And what happened? The defensive line was outstanding in year two of Al Washington. Became a strength of the team. Does that happen with the O-line? Do we see a similar jump in the O-line, or is it completely different and it's going to be as inconsistent as it was last year? Because the frustrating thing, Vince, was at times last year, the offensive line was phenomenal. And you go back and watch the Ohio State game. They were excellent in that game against a great defensive line and defensive coordinator. And then a week later, Duke comes to they go to Duke and just get obliterated.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I can't figure this O-line out. I can't figure them out. And now it's like, okay, it's just a big question mark, because we didn't know what they were last year, Vince, from week to week.
Sure.
And now you've got a brand new looking offensive line. So, well, hey, they played great in the bowl game. Yeah, I get that. But they played great at times last year as well. And then the next week they'd go out and lay an egg. If they would have played another game a week later, would they have been just as good as they were against Oregon State, or would they have taken a step back? Because that's what they did last year. And that's where you say, okay, that's a coaching thing right there. When there's a lack of focus from week to week, and there's a lack of attention to detail week to week, and assignment execution from week to week, Vince, you point right back to the guy in the front of the room.
Sure.
And that's what Coach Rudolph has to prove, is that he can get that out of the team. Because, again, we've seen this before in year one of an assistant coach, but not every coach in year two gets it figured out. Al Washington did. Will Joe Rudolph? That remains a big question mark.
It's a huge question mark. And, it's going to be interesting because of the familiarity that these guys have with Joe Rudolph. I mean, these are his guys. At the end of the day, now he didn't recruit them. I get that part. He didn't recruit them, but he's been their coach. These are all for the most part, young guys who have really only known him as their coach, within reason, right? Because, they could have been third string, under Harry Hiestand, 2 years ago, that kind of a deal. But their formative years is the best way I can put it. Their formative years as an offensive lineman at Notre Dame has been under Joe Rudolph. And so it's not really a coach versus coach thing anymore, I don't think. It's like, hey, this is our coach. This is who we have to play for. You know what I mean? And you're not going to – I hope anyway that you don't see a group of guys that are, man, I liked it a lot better when Coach Hiestand was here.
I'm not saying that. Like,
right.
I don't want it to come across like they were intentionally disrespectful or dismissive of Joe Rudolph. I'm not saying that. It's more of – it's like with anything. You have a teacher who's a phenomenal teacher, right? And he makes it entertaining and it makes it interesting, and you just love learning from the guy or girl or female. Sure. And then you go to the next semester and you've got a different history teacher of a subject, and they're not as good. Now, they may know the subject matter even more, even better than the one before, but the different style, like, man, I learned so much under that other teacher. Maybe they didn't know as much, but the way they taught was great, right? And I'm not saying that's true for Harry Hiestand, because nobody knows more about O-line play than Harry Hiestand. I'm making the point that when you have a different teacher, I want to learn, but you're not reaching me the way that I'm good at being reached. Or, well, hey, this professor I had last year that's won all these, prizes for being the best teacher, in the country, said this is important. And now you're telling me that this is important, or you're not emphasizing that. So I don't think it was a necessarily, I'm not accusing any of the players of being cognitively anti Joe Rudolph, or I'm just not going to listen to that guy. Right. It's just inherently when you're young and you've learned under the master, so to speak, there's going to be an understandable, well, are you sure about that? And then there were some things that happened during the season where I think Joe Rudolph did things that kind of created a loss of confidence, an understandable one. For example, showing up the day of the Louisville game and being like, oh, by the way, we're going to do a rotation today in today's game.
That was wild.
You know what I mean? It's like, you're going to lose a little bit of faith in a coach that way. But, the lessons have been learned, and hopefully now you're in a situation where it's going to be a little bit more solid moving forward. Yeah. But, look, trust is earned, Vince.
Oh, 100%.
The Harry Hiestand earned the trust of the players. Now it's up to Coach Rudolph to do the same thing. I'm not saying he can or he can't. I'm just saying that's the task in front of him. And to your point, Charles Jagas was recruited by Harry Hiestand, but he's never played for him.
Right.
You look at Billy Schrouth, he's going into his third year. So this will be his second year with Joe Rudolph. He spent 1 year with Harry Hiestand. Ashton Craig spent 1 year with Harry Hiestand.
Yeah.
Pat Coogan spent 1 year with Harry Hiestand. He spent 1 year with Jeff Quinn, and now he's going to have 2 years of Joe Rudolph. So there's that aspect of it, Vince, where you look at this line and say, okay, how are they going to receive him? But it's about him establishing that connection, right? Like, it's about him establishing, like, okay, this is why you buy into what I'm doing, because not because you tell, like, if you have to tell players I'm in charge, then you're not in charge, right? Like, that's just, that should be a given based on how you run the room and how you handle the position.
It's kind of like parenting, to be honest with you.
If you have to assert your authority, then you've lost it. Right? You've lost your way. Exactly. So I always love it. I'm the parent. Yeah. We all know that, but you're not acting like one. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Right.
And with coaching, it's the same way. It's like, look, you've got to give them a reason to look at you and say, we got you, coach. Show us the way. Lead us. And that's what Coach Rudolph has to do. I'm not saying he will or won't. I'm just saying that's the task in front of him.
Right.
That's the challenge in front of him, Vince, when you look at this team, to say, hey, look, you were given this really impressive, talented group of players that Jeff Quinn and Harry Hiestand both put together, right? Like, you got to give – and Tommy Rees, because if it wasn't for Tommy Rees, Billy Schrouth doesn't come to Notre Dame. He didn't want to play for Jeff Quinn.
It's a good point.
Tommy Rees landed Billy Schrouth in between Jeff Quinn leaving and Harry Hiestand showing up. Because remember, when we knew that Coach Quinn was leaving, but he stayed on because he's an honorable man. He stayed on during bowl season and prep those players and got them ready, even though he knew he wasn't going to be the O-line coach next year. Right. Another reason why, as a man, I have a great deal of respect for Jeff Quinn.
Absolutely.
As a coach, not so much, but as a man, and I would much rather me as a good person than as a good coach, if we're being free. But let's not go down that rabbit trail again. But the point is, during that period of time is when they landed Billy Schrouth, because he didn't want to play for Coach Quinn. And Tommy Rees is the one that stepped in and sealed the deal. Because I think Billy always wanted to be at Notre Dame, but there was uncertainty. I shouldn't say he didn't want to play for Jeff Quinn. There was uncertainty about the future of the line with Jeff Quinn there. That's more of the concern, I think, than it was, I don't like Jeff Quinn. I want to make sure I'm clear on that.
Right.
And then Tommy Rees stepped into the void during that period in between and said, okay, let's get this done. And he got Billy to commit to Notre Dame. So those three guys really played a big role in putting this group of talent together. And so Jeff Quinn was Joe Rudolph was kind of handed this like, okay, here's this really talented group of players. Do something with it. Right? Like that's what Deland McCullough walked into, right? Like Coach McCullough's done a great job of rebuilding the group, or not rebuilding, but reloading. He went out and got, Jeremiah Love and Kedron Young and Aeneas Williams, but he inherited Audric Estime, Logan Diggs, and Jadarian Price. Like they were like, here you go, coach. You're welcome. Welcome to Notre Dame. Here you go. Chris Tyree was part of that group as well. So Joe Rudolph inherited a very talented group of players. There's no doubt about it. But he didn't inherit a very experienced group of players beyond the three kind of starters. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like that he had. His first offensive line. You had the two juniors at tackle and a fifth-year senior, and after that, it was a lot of youth. Or I should say youth and or inexperience.
Yeah, right.
And that's, because like now it's like, okay, it's like seniors and then like young guys. And that's kind of where they're at. And so the task in front of him is like, you were given this big, incredibly impressive ball of clay. What are you going to do with it?
Exactly. And let's use that as a transition to the fact that the success of this line is going to be all about the development of them, because they were all fairly highly recruited guys. They were all high ceiling. I'll at least put it that way. They're all high ceiling guys.
Except for one. I don't think Pat Coogan's that guy.
Okay, that's fair.
But he's the exception.
Right. The majority of these guys are all high ceiling guys. And are they going to reach their potential? What has the development under Joe Rudolph in the last year and a half been like?
Right.
That's the big question, because if the development has been solid and these guys are able to mesh with each other, I think this line's going to be really good. I look, there's going to be growing pains. I get that part. They're young, they're inexperienced. I get that. But as a whole, as the season progresses, they're going to get better and better and better and better, and they're going to be really good. But has that development taken place? That's a huge question mark right now.
Well, these guys have gone through a very unique experience that can't be ignored. And we often talk about a comment I made earlier, Vince. Well, they've had 3 offensive line coaches in 3 years. Okay, fair. You know what they've also had 3 different in 3 years?
OCs?
Strength coaches.
Oh, strength coaches, yeah.
And coordinators.
Yeah.
Right? So, like, UOC was one, but I was just like, strength coach to me from a development of an offensive lineman, it's O-line coach, strength coach, coordinator.
Sure.
Like, that's the order of importance.
Right. And coordinator is important because of scheme and what you're good at.
Also, you're setting the tone on how you practice and things along those lines. Right.
For sure.
But when you look at it, they had Matt Bayless, like Billy Schrouth's class, for example, the junior class, which could potentially have 3 starters this year because you've got Billy Schrouth, you've got Ashton Craig, and then potentially Emil Wagner, which we'll get into when we get into the position battle. You could have 3 guys from that junior class starting on the offensive line this year. Those 3 guys, Vince, have played for 2 offensive line coaches, 3 coordinators, and have had now a 3rd strength coach. That lack of continuity is concerning. And so if we're being fair to Joe Rudolph, we can't ignore that that's something he's also dealing with. Like, we focus on, dude, you got a foundation laid by Harry Heastan, which he did. You inherited a really talented group of players, which he did. But this is also a group of players that are learning basically a 3rd offense in 3 years.
Yeah.
And are in their now 3rd straight offensive or strength coach. That matters. And that's gonna be a roadblock that Joe Rudolph's gonna have to find a way past. Because that's not going to be an excuse for not being successful this year. Acknowledging it as a reality does not then create it being a built-in excuse for why you can't be successful. When you have things like that, Vince, as a coach, you're saying, okay, well, this is the reality. I don't have enough talent over here, or I don't have experience over there, or I lack depth over here, or hey, we've got a new strength coach. Okay, all those things are reality, but those aren't things that are standing in your way of being good. Those are things you have to sort of maneuver through and work with on your way to being good if you're a good coach. And when you have talent, like the one thing you can't really work around is I just don't have good players.
Sure.
You can work around it to a degree, but at the end of the day, when you go out and play Alabama and your players are not as good as their players, 9 times out of 10, you're catching a beat down that day, right? When there's a big gap.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the case here. The talent's there. It's can this group become the unit they need to be in spite, or not in spite of, can they work through and manage through all the adversity they have faced to get there? Because you could look at it 2 ways, Vince. One is these are stumbling blocks that are going to keep this line from being as good as they need to be, or these are things this group has had to learn they've had to learn how to deal with adversity. They've had to learn a lot of different things. They've been pushed in a lot of different ways, and it's something that's going to make this group stronger. There's 2 ways of looking at it. Which one becomes reality? Those are just, okay, could go here, could go there. What becomes the reality? I use this phrase all the time, Vince. Can your potential turn into production? And that is the epitome of what this offensive line is. It's all about potential. And we will have games this year where they're going to look like a group that's made up of, I had Charles Jagas as a 5-star player. I had Billy Shrouth as a top 100 player. I gave Ashton Craig, I believe, a top 150 overall upside, or excuse me, a top 50 overall upside. I'm actually going to pull that up now, Vince, now that you talk about it. Because if you remember, I didn't have Ashton graded super high coming out of high school because he was like 265 pounds.
Oh, he was an absolute project.
Yeah, but I loved his upside. I mean, he was a guy that I thought had, yes, I graded Ashton Craig. I'm looking at the profile I have for him as a 4-star top 250 caliber player coming out, because he did make strides as a senior, with 4.5-star upside. Goes to your point about the upside part. This is a kid that from Lawrenceburg, Indiana, Vince, which I've never heard of.
I think we drove through it actually yesterday.
But have you ever? I mean,
no.
Had you heard of Lawrenceburg, Indiana?
No.
My excuse: I've only lived here since 2010, and I spent 2 years not even here. Right? You were born and raised here, and you never heard of the city.
Never.
And this kid's from there, and he's got offers from Notre Dame, Michigan, Florida State, Nebraska. You know what I'm saying? Like, this kid was a really good really talented football player. I didn't see him as being as good as Joe Walt coming out, but not too far off as far as upside, because he was a really athletic kid. And then, of course, but he needed to learn a lot. Billy Shrouth is a guy that I ranked as a top 100 player coming out of high school with I believe 5-star upside grade. Oh, no, 4.5-star upside grade. I guess I didn't have Billy as a 5-star because I tend to not give a ton of those out. And then Emil Wagner, I only graded as a top 250 caliber prospect because of his lack of size. But you know what his upside grade was? 5-star. So, I mean, his upside to me was even greater than the other two based on just the God-given ability. The question was, can he fill out? And then you've got, left guard, you've got Pat Coogan right now, but behind him you got Rocco Spindler, who I graded out as a top 150 to 250 caliber player coming out of high school. You got Selvin Absher, who's a borderline top 100 player coming out of high school. You got Sam Pendleton, who I graded as a top 150 player coming out of high school. Josh Baker, I graded as a top 100 player coming out of high school. He hasn't panned out. He's not going to be that guy. But there was a lot of people that were high on Josh Baker coming out. Charles Jagasol, Gerby Lambert as a true freshman is a 5-star player. The tools are there, Vince. It's just about, can you coach them up? And I didn't even mention guys like Christopher Tarrick, who had a great spring, Joe Otting, who I liked a lot coming out. I think he's going to need a little bit more time of development. There's a lot of guys there that have ability. It's like, okay, but can you bring them all together and turn them into one really good offensive line? That's going to be the task in front of Joe Rudolph, and that's going to be the thing that ultimately determines just how good this line can be. They can score a lot of points with a mediocre offensive line. We just watched them do it last year. They set a school record in points and points per game, and the second best yards per play average of the last 50 years, plus years. Second best, only behind the 15 Notre Dame offense with Mike Denbrock, with an inconsistent, mediocre offensive line, issues at receiver and quarterback in different areas, and an offensive coordinator that was learning on the job. And they still went out and scored 39 points, right? So they can score a lot of points without it, but they were never good enough in the biggest moments. That's the question. That's the question. And we're going to find out if this group can be better than that or not.
Now, you kind of mentioned this with talking about the upside and all of those things. I mean, this group has talent. There's no doubt about it. This group has talent. If they are able, within reason, right? It's still year one starting for a lot of these guys. It's definitely year one starting for all of them together, right? So if they reach,
we don't count one game
right
as a year starting together. Exactly.
Correct. And look, Rocco and Coogan and Pat, they started the whole year, right? But now they're potentially going to be in a different position. You know, there's all kinds of things that weren't there last year that are there this year. So if they are able to reach their first year starting together ability, what do you see this line being? You know, what's their ceiling as a whole? Does that make sense?
Yeah. What I've said about this line is I think what they can be is by the end of the year, top 10 offensive line and a team that can go out and a group unit that in 2025 can then put themselves in position to go out and win the Joe Moore Award next year.
Okay.
That's their ceiling. Like
it's a foundational year for.
Can this be a top 5 offensive line? Talent wise, yes, but with the lack of experience, I don't know if they can be that all year. Could they maybe be that by the time we get rolling into the postseason? Maybe. That just depends on how good of a job Joe Rudolph does this year.
Sure.
But the talent is there. I mean, look, there's not many teams in the country, and I don't even know if you even need a whole set of fingers on one hand to count them, that if you ask their coaches in a moment of off the records, honesty, would you trade your offensive lineman for Notre Dame's offensive lineman? There aren't many offensive line coaches who are like, no, I'm good. Unless they're just terrible offensive line coaches.
Right.
Like, I don't know that LSU would trade their offensive lineman for Notre Dame simply because they're so much more experienced in 2024. It's going to be a different conversation for LSU next year when Will Campbell and some of those guys are off to the NFL, right? Like, there's like maybe Bama with some of that, but even them, I think Bama might be like, oh yeah, we'll think about that. Give me a minute on that one. Texas maybe wouldn't because again, they're very experienced. They have like a bunch of multi-year starters coming back. But if you say, okay, take experience out of the equation, that list gets even smaller, right? And so that's where they're at. The question again, it boils down to how quickly can they get to their full potential? Because look, this is how the season is. This is one thing I can guarantee about this group this season. There's going to be some weeks where you're going to be like, yep, that's the future Joe Moore Award winning offensive line that Driscoll was talking about.
Sure. And
then there's going to be other weeks where like, that clown thinks this group can go win a Joe Moore Award. You're going to see that in certain weeks. It's just, it's the thing I'm probably most confident in. When you have a new look offensive line, there's just going to be weeks like that. Now, I don't think they're going to play that terrible. It's just that's sort of the overreaction that we have as fans.
Right. For sure.
The question is going to be, okay, is it just a couple blips on the radar, so to speak, or does this become a consistent pattern like it was last year? And those games just more, by and large, tend to happen to them in the biggest moments against the best defenses, right? Outside of Ohio State, that's kind of what happened to them last year.
Yeah.
Is when they played the best defenses, they struggled.
Yeah.
Now we need to see if this group can be any different.
It's fair.
And just be more I don't even need you to be as good. Like, if they never play as well as the line did against Ohio State or as well as the line did against, say, Stanford or, pick a game where they were just dominant. If they never play that well, but they're never as bad as they were against Duke and Louisville, I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
I would much rather have a median of right here. Clemson won 2 national titles with just veteran, solid, but not great offensive lines. I think the highest drafted guy up from those Clemson championship teams is like a 4th rounder. Notre Dame had 2 guys picked in the 1st and 2nd round last year, right? Like, they produce guys higher ranked than that than like on the regular.
Right.
And, it's just, can you be here?
Sure.
How often can you be here? That's going to be the question.
Well, and the reason that the question is, can you be here, is the inexperience. And so let's dig into that just a little bit, because you're talking about, okay, this line, they were able to play together one time last year in the bowl game. Okay, they all got one start under their belt for that. You got a couple of guys that played the last, 3 games of the season. So they got a couple of starts under their belt there. And then you've got 2 guys potentially, now they're battling with each other who started the entire season last year, but one of them is going to cancel out the other one as far as a whole season's worth of starts, right? And so that affects things too. And so, you gave me a number in our pregame talk was 34 career starts with this group. Does that include both Coogan and okay?
It's
so
just
Coogan and Rocco, that's 34.
Without taking any consideration into where guys play.
Okay.
Because you have 13 from Coogan, you have 10 from Rocco, you have 1 from Jagas, that's 24. You have 3 each from Coogan from Spindler or Schrouth and Craig. That gets you to 30. Tosh has 4 career starts, although one of his career starts was literally against Ohio State last year, where he lined up in a 6 offensive line alignment on the first play of the game.
That's that. It's a start, but
for an offensive line, he's only started 3 games as an offensive tackle. So 2 of them in 2021.
Yeah,
1 of them, and then 1 last in the bowl game. So that's 34. Right. So I mean, it counts as a start.
It does.
I included it, but like for all intents and purposes, to your point, Vince, that's not really a start where you're gaining a ton of experience.
Correct.
You can play like 3 or 4 snaps that game.
He's a pack. It was a package situation. You
right.
know, it's like when the 4th receiver starts in a game because you happen to go 4 wide when you start the game. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But a start's a start, so we'll say 34. So the entire offensive line has 34 career starts under its belt. Remember a couple of years ago, there were individuals that had that many starts under their belt.
Yeah.
It felt like I can't remember what year it was. You're going to be better at this than I am. But there was a year where there was like 100+ career starts.
Oh yeah. I'm trying to remember what year it was. Like 2020. I think it was. Maybe
is that what it was? It was a ridiculous number.
It was somewhat recent. It might have been 2017.
Okay.
It might have been 2017 because you had, Quentin Nelson started all of 15, all of 16, and then going into 17 was, he had what 26, 25 starts under his belt. Alex Bars started. I say 25 because you remember he missed a game in 2015. He injured his ankle, and then Alex Bars started for him, I believe, that year. And then Alex started all of 2016. So Alex had 14 starts under his belt. That's 39 between the two of them. McGlinchey started all of 15, all of 16, and the bowl game of 2017. So that gave him 20. Was it 20? No, it should be 24 starts for Q because I forgot they only played 12 games in 2016. But so that's mid 20s for McGlinchey, right? So 25, 26 for McGlinchey, and then I'm trying to think. You had Sam Mustipher, who started all of 2016. So I mean, you had a ton of starts under your belt for that football team going into that season,
right?
And you had a lot going into 2020 as well. I mean, Robert Hainsey was basically on his 4th year as a starter. Liam Eichenberg was going into his 3rd year as a starter. Aaron Banks was going into basically his 2nd or full year as a starter. You had Jarrett Patterson was going into his 3rd full year as a starter in 2020. So there was a lot of it would be 2nd. Wait a minute, because Patterson took over in he took over in 19, right? Because Sam Mustipher was a starter in 18 at center. Or no, who was the starting center in 2018? I'm now drawing a blank. It was Sam Mustipher, right? Because Bars and Mustipher were on that team in 18, and then Alex got hurt. That's right. It was Mustipher. So he left then, and Patterson took over in 13. And so he was and then of course Tommy Kramer in 2020 going into that year had 3 years of starting under his belt as well. So that line 2020 had a bunch of starts as well. I don't know if it was over 100, but it was because it might have been because you had, remember, Josh Lugg started like 9 games in his career before going into that year, and as a backup, you had Andrew Kristofic, I think, had earned some starts in Andrew earned starts in 2021, but you had several guys that had started games that year. And so it might have been 2020 as well. Vince might have been the year that I'm remembering. But yeah, you had a lot. Well, then just last year, I mean, Joe Alt coming into last year had 20 career starts.
Sure.
Going into last year,
Fisher had a whole year's worth.
Yeah, Zeke Carell had started multiple seasons. He started all 13 games in 2022. Right. He started 5 or 6 games in 2021, and he started, I think, 4 games in 2020. When Jarrett Patterson was out, or 2 games, and then he got hurt. So you had a lot of experience on last year's offensive line, and it still struggled because you had two positions where you had no experience, like literally 22 career snaps at guard last year. That part won't be as big of a problem across the board. There may be one position where that's true, but at the other 4 spots, you're at least going to have somebody that's played a decent amount of football. You know what I mean? At least has one full start under his belt, in Charles Jagas. So,
right.
But here's why that's a concern, Vince. And here's what it comes down to. This is why we have the concerns that we have with the O-line. Because, we're going to get into the players one by one as we get into part 2 of the show today. But the reality is, Vince, is there's a lot of talent here. And normally talent trumps experience, normally, at most positions. This is one where it doesn't. And there's 2 reasons why. Number one, any position that's primary focus is physicality, the older you are, the better you're going to be.
Bigger, stronger.
If I'm an 18-year-old guy that's super quick and fast, it doesn't matter that you can bench way more than me because you can't touch me. You can't catch me.
Right, exactly.
And when the ball's in the air, it's like illegal for you to hit me. So you get that grown man strength on the offensive line, you're going to be better in most cases. The other part is there's so much that goes into playing offensive line, Vince, from a technical and mental standpoint, on top of the physicality, that any uncertainty when you're banging like this every single play, any bit of uncertainty or lack of technical prowess is going to get you beat. Yep. It's one of the big reasons so many people are hung up on Charles Jagas, because they'll watch the spring game and you got 2 or 3 times this guy ran right by, and I don't think watch him play. Watch him take a cross step and his feet come together on every single time he got beat outside. He does this weird hitch in the middle of his pass pro and on those snaps, he gets beat around the edge by what we consider to be one of the best D-lines in college football, which people seem to have forgotten. But he does this thing, and it's a technical problem. It's not that he lacks quickness, he doesn't lack length. It's a technical problem. And when you have technical problems in the offensive line, Vince, and you're playing a good team, you are going to get exposed.
Yep.
You're going to get beat. Why did R.J. Oben beat Joe Walt for a sack last year? Only sack he gave up in 2 years. Joe was out of a stance late.
Yep.
Because there was some snap miscommunication. What happens? Gets whooped by R.J. Oben.
Yep.
Even the best in the business, one lapse, and he all of a sudden his quarterback gets sacked. Right? So those are things you look at and say the experience at receiver rarely trumps the talent and just the way the game is played, because it's just I got to run a corner route. I got to know what everyone else around me is doing, but I'm not dependent on anyone else to do my job. No one. I can do it. Now, receivers have to know everything because I can't run my post route this way. Like if I have a skinny post, I got to stay skinny, because if I'm like, well, the safety was playing high, so I break my post off and take a skinny. Yeah, but we got a deep overcoming there. You ran into him. You stay skinny because you have to understand what's coming underneath you. If that guy stays tall, that safety stays tall, good. That's what we want. That's going to open up something else that we're doing. So you have to know it all, but none of those guys are dependent on you doing your job.
Right.
The offensive line is, and even D-line, it's like I still got to do my job. The defense as a whole may not work if other guys don't do their job, but all I got to do is my job. Offensive line is literally the only position in football outside of a quarterback exchange and a throw, which is a little different, to where I can't do my job if you don't do your job. It's the one position, it's the one place in football where that's true. Outside of a quarterback, no, even throwing, you can still do your job as a receiver. If the quarterback misses you, then
that's not your fault.
On him.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
If you don't, there's 2 other areas: quarterback, running back exchange, and snap, holding and kicking. That's it. Right? I mean, kicker can't do his job if the guy doesn't hold.
Correct.
Right? So it makes it a very unique position. And that's why the experience part is so important in ways that it's not important. Because I've heard people say, well, you never care about experience at receiver, running back. Why are you so obsessed with it here? And it's like, because I've been in football for the last 30 some years of my life. And I've seen it. I've seen talented offensive lines be not very good because they don't play together. for whatever reason. Sometimes it could be bad coaching. Sometimes it's inexperience. Sometimes it's just not good attitudes. It's lack of cohesiveness. For whatever the reason, when an offensive line doesn't play as one, it doesn't look good. I'm watching The Chosen on rewatching The Chosen, Vince, and there's talking about the teachings of Jesus, and they'll talk about like the parables they use. And so I like kind of using those, and I've used those when I teach, not as parables, but just stories, right, or examples to make a point. If you're listening, and this is the one I love for the offensive line, if you're listening to a symphony, right, all the instruments playing together, when they are all reading from the same, score, and they got it down, it's like it is a beautiful thing. Like I've literally listened to a symphony before where it almost brings you to tears. It's just so moving. Then you listen to one where maybe they're not as on par.
Makes a difference.
And it's like, ooh, what was that? And it just sounds really bad. Offensive line is like a great symphony, or is it like a symphony when they're all reading from the same score and they're all on the same page and they're in rhythm? Man, it is beautiful.
Yep.
When they're not, everyone sees it or hears it, and it, and they're not nearly as effective. And that's the difference. That's what makes it so unique, Vince.
Yeah. So one of the things that this line is lacking at the moment, or I should say, let me rephrase that. One of the things that this line has lost to the NFL is star power, right? I mean, dudes, studs, in Joe Alt and, Blake Fisher.
You can stop there.
Yeah.
Blake had potential to be so, but he
just never got there at Notre Dame.
He was at times.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Joe Alt was the dude. He was the All-American. He was the first name out of your mouth when you talked about Notre Dame offensive line. He's a top 5 NFL draft pick. He was a dude, period. And so he's gone. Is there anybody that can pick up that mantle? I'm not saying top 5 NFL draft pick based on this year, but I'm talking about being a guy, being a dude on this line.
Because I don't even look at it from the standpoint of, you have to replace Joe Alt. I'm looking at it bigger picture, Vince.
Yeah.
Let's talk about every great offensive line that we've seen since 2010 and see if we can agree on some things. Do we agree the 2012 offensive line was great in the regular season? Played great, right? Carried that offense. Do we agree that the 2015 team had a great offensive line? Do we agree that the 2017 had a great offensive line? Do we agree that the 2020 team had a great offensive line? Do we agree that those are the 4 best offensive lines that Notre Dame has had since 2010? Do we agree on that?
Absolutely.
Okay. Zach Martin, Ronnie Stanley, Quentin Nelson, Mike McGlinchey, Liam Eichenberg, Robert Hainsey, Aaron Banks. What do all those guys mean? Zach Martin was an All-American, star player. 15, you had 3. Ronnie Stanley, Quentin Nelson, Mike McGlinchey were all stars. Quentin and Ronnie for sure were that season. 2017, Quentin and McGlinchey were stars. And in 2020, Liam Eichenberg was a star. Aaron Banks was a star for most of the year. And Robert Hainsey was not a star, but was about as steady as you could be, which to me made him be basically like a star player. He was a 3rd-round NFL draft pick.
Exactly.
Every single great Notre Dame offensive line has had guys that didn't become stars. That season, they were stars. They were great players. Does anybody emerge and take that mantle for Notre Dame in 2024?
Right.
That's the question. Going into 2012, you kind of thought that was going to be Zach Martin. He was going into his 3rd year as a starter. He was pretty darn good in 2011. In 2015, you thought Ronnie Stanley could maybe be that, but he was really inconsistent in 2014. You thought Quentin Nelson could be that, but he was a redshirt freshman who didn't play the year before because back then, remember, you couldn't play 4 games in redshirt. If you played a snap, you lost your redshirt outside of injury. So Q went into that 2015 season having played 0 snaps of football. You go into 2017, and they were established. It was Q and McGlinchey. They were both All-Americans the year before. One of the most overlooked things of the Notre Dame last 10 years was that the 2016 offensive line outside of right guard was actually pretty good. That was not their problem. They had a lot of other problems that year. McGlinchey, I think, was a 3rd-team All-American. Nelson was a 2nd or the other way around. I can't remember. And then in 2017, they were established. And then in 2020, I don't know that any of them were established stars, but you thought they could become that. Liam Eichenberg, Banks, Hainsey. They weren't established stars, but they were veteran, multi-year starters that we thought could become those type of players. This team, you look at and say, okay, I don't know that they have that outside of maybe one position. And even that one position, we're talking about a guy that's only played 3 games, right? Like that's the question, Vince, is because the most talent, and this is part of the problem that Notre Dame has. Their most talented players are their least experienced. That's the issue. Charles Jagas is a redshirt freshman who's got 1 career start under his belt. Billy Schrouth and Ashton Craig are redshirt sophomores who have 3 career starts under their belt. And Emil Wagner's a redshirt sophomore who has 0 career starts under his belt. Those are the 4 most talented offensive linemen who are in position to potentially start this year. I'm not talking about Gerby Lambert. He's a true freshman. He's not going to be in this conversation. He may start, but I don't expect him to be a star as a freshman. So the question is okay, well, it's a little different situation than what we talked about. As I mentioned, Zach Martin, 2 years of starting under his belt going into 2012. Ronnie Stanley, 2 years of starting under his belt going into 2015. McGlinchey and Nelson had already established themselves as studs. Liam Eichenberg, Hainsey, Banks, multi-year starters under their belt. This is a little bit different. And that's why you have to ask yourself, like, to be a great line, you need at least a great player as part of it, in my opinion. But the thing is, the other part too, Vince, is if you have a guy or two that steps up like that, it can also help eliminate some of the problems. We saw that last year. The greatness of Joe Alt sort of alleviated some of the issues they had.
It did.
If he wasn't there, it would have been way worse.
Yep.
And so it's either if you want to be a great line, you need a star to emerge. Because you can have a pretty good offensive line and not have any stars. I just talked about that with Clemson. But to be like an elite line where you're the driver of this team, as Marcus Freeman says, we're a line-driven program. In order to be that, you need someone to be a star, at least someone to be a star, because that's what great lines have. And then number 2, the more of those type of players you have, the more they can overcome maybe some holes in other spots. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of the big question, the final question for me, Vince, as we preview this team heading into the season before we start getting individual players per se, is I don't know who that's going to be. I don't know if it's going to be Billy Schrouth. I don't know if it's going to be Charles Jagas. I don't know if it's going to be Ashton Craig. I don't know if it's going to be Rocco Spindler. I don't know if it's going to be Pat Coogan. I don't know if it's going to be Tosh Baker. I don't know if it's going to be Emil Wagner. I don't have a clue who it's going to be. I have kind of my pecking order of who I think it's going to be, and I kind of went in the order of what I think that could be. I'd probably maybe flip Craig and Jagas just because of experience. But at least one person's going to have to step up and be that guy.
Yeah.
I don't know who that's going to be.
Sure.
But it's certainly needed for this team.
Well, and everybody that you named from those other lines, you kind of, not you specifically, but you could tell who that might be based on past performances, right? They were returning starters. They were guys that necessarily weren't the dude on the line the previous year, but they started the whole year. You know what I mean? Those guys aren't as prevalent on this particular offensive line, right? I mean, you've got guys that have some starts on their resume, but you don't have, right now, all we know right now, and I think that we know it, is that left guard is going to consist of somebody who started all of last year for the most part. That's all we really know. And so other than that, there isn't that next guy in waiting to be the next star. You see what I'm saying? Like, it's not an easy thing to pick out. So it's kind of wide open, to be honest.
Well, with you. Like, what's the one exception to what you just said? There's one exception. Who was that one exception?
Billy.
No, to the past teams.
Oh, gotcha.
Who was the one exception that we had no clue if he was actually going to be a star?
Joe Alt.
No.
Oh, come on.
Joe had established himself in 2022.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
What I'm saying is he became one in 2022, but we weren't sure he was going to become that good in his second year. We said that year, Vince, that's what we thought Joe Alt was going to be in 2023.
Yeah, right.
The guy he was in 22 is who we thought he'd be in 23, and what he was in 23 is what we thought he'd be in 24 as a senior.
Right.
He was just a year ahead.
Right.
It was Q, because he was a redshirt freshman, never played.
Sure.
I say, Martin had been a 2-year starter. Stanley had been a 2-year starter. Because remember,
Right.
Ronnie started at right tackle in 13 opposite Zach Martin, and he moved to left tackle in 2014. And he was inconsistent, but when he was on, he was really good.
Sure.
You know, when you went into 2017, even 2016, McGlinchey had a full year of starting under his belt. 2017, McGlinchey had 2 full years of starting under his belt. Going into 2020, Hainsey had been starting since 17.
Right.
Kramer had been starting since 17. Banks stepped into the starting lineup in 18. Eichenberg stepped to the starting lineup in 18. Jarrett Patterson was coming off a full year under his belt as a starter, right? Like, that's the difference. Well, you can't use Quentin as well. Hey, Quentin Nelson did it, so Billy Schrauth should be able to do it. Well, Quentin Nelson was a freak.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, again, you don't use the exception to make the rule. There aren't a lot of guys that are 6'5", 340 and athletic like Quentin Nelson. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Right.
And so there is talent there. There are guys like we're not going to – if somebody becomes a star, we're going to be like, wow, I didn't see that coming. Like, unless it's Pat Coogan, right? Like, that's the only guy that could break out and be a star who I'm like, I didn't see that coming. You know, so like, let's say Tosh Baker goes out and becomes that guy. You're like, well, I didn't think he had it in him based on what we saw last year, but this is who we thought he was going to be when Notre Dame signed him. You know, this is why he was a top 100 recruit. This is what we thought Tosh was going to be, right? If Emil Wagner, hey, I had him as a 5-star upside guy. I saw this coming. Billy Schrauth, dude, I had him as a top 100 player. Ashton Craig, I had him as a 4.5-star upside guy. Charles Jagas literally has him as a 5-star. It's like, so all those guys have the ability. It's just there's reasons why I can explain why they won't be that guy this year, or might not. That's not the way I want to say it. There's all those guys I can point to reasons why I'm concerned about whether or not they're in position, because again, all those guys had multiple years of starting. The 3 most talented returning starters that we, as of right now, that we know are going to be returning starters, have combined for 7 starts. Combined for 7 starts. That's it. That's why there's I don't know if this is the time. Maybe it's next year. But as you said, the point, because you got a little frustrated when you didn't get the answer right, but you kind of did in this regard, because we didn't know Joe Walt was going to be that going into 2022.
Right.
We thought he was going to be good based on what we saw from him in 7 games to start. But we know he's going to.
He still had half a season of starting.
American.
He still had half a season of starts under his belt.
Right.
Which is what those other 3 guys have combined.
Right.
So it's just not obvious who that guy is this year.
Right. It's obvious who it might be.
Sure.
But it's not obvious who it's going to become. But that's why I think the Joe Walt example makes a lot of sense, Vince, because we thought Joe Walt was going to become a star, but we thought he was still probably a year away from that.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, isn't that kind of what we think about Billy Schrauth, Ashton Craig, and Charles Jagas? We think they're going to be stars, but they're probably all a year away from being that. So does one of those guys, at least one of those guys, kind of pull a Joe Walt where they get going a little bit faster? We'll see. We'll see. But what I do know, Vince, is they need that to happen if this line's going to reach its full potential.
Right.
But that's also why I've said I think the 25-0 line could be special. Because you have 3 guys like that have that kind of elite talent who will all be double-digit career starts going into next year.
Yeah, we'll be having a completely different conversation this time next year when we're talking about the offensive line. That's my prediction. I mean, look, this is not a throwaway year for the offensive line. I don't want people to think that is not at all what we're saying when we're saying that they're going to be really good potentially in 25. But they have to build the foundation this year. And they can be good to really good this year, which will then propel them to being a potential elite offensive line in 25. I think that's the point that we're trying to make. And it's exciting, frankly, to see it all happen, because there is a lot of talent there. It's just, will they live up to it in the first year? That's the question going into this whole thing. So let's talk about the line in general and the makeup of what this line is about to be, because I'm very interested to see, first of all, how this thing shakes out, because we're talking about what we think this offensive line is going to be. Obviously, we think they're going to be good this year. We think they're going to be potentially great next year, but we don't even know for sure who the starting 5 are going to be this year. So, that's going to be an important piece of fall camp. It's going to be an important piece of our conversation today. is, okay, left tackle, got it. Center, got it. Right guard, got it. There's a position battle at right tackle, and there's a position battle at left guard. And this is an important conversation to have, in that whoever ends up winning that battle, or whoever ends up getting named the starter, is look, that's 2/5 of the starting offensive line. This is going to be this is 40%. This is a very important decision that has to be made here. How is that decision going to be made, right? Is it going to be just, oh, well, he's got the most experience, let's put him in? Or is it going to be, hey, this guy legitimately beat this guy out? Those are all legitimate question marks. So let's break this thing down, Brian. Let's start over at right tackle. I think that's probably the one that gives people the most angst. Word of the day.
Yeah.
All right. Let's talk right tackle and the guys that are in the mix, in the battle. I think there's two primary guys in battle for it, but then there's some other names that we could potentially, throw in there as well.
Two primaries and two wild cards. And
that's a great way to put it.
It's going to be the same thing at left guard. There's going to be two primaries and one wild card. One of the interesting things is there's a wild card at both. One guy is a wild card at both. And we'll get into that. But look, it really comes down to the right tackle battle is going to be interesting, because it's going to have an impact on what the ceiling and the floor of this line is going to be. If Tosh Baker wins the job, then to me it raises the floor of what this offensive line can be. I have more confidence that Tosh Baker right now, without seeing a single snap of fall camp, I'm more confident that Tosh Baker can consistently do his job week to week to week to week than I am with Emil Wagner. That's why Tosh raises the floor. Emil, however, raises the ceiling of the offensive line. I don't know if Emil can handle the physical workload for 13 games or maybe even 16 games. I don't know that Emil is yet at the position where his lack of behind isn't going to be a problem for him against the best defensive lines on the schedule. I don't know the answer to that yet, because when you look at Notre Dame's schedule, outside of Patrick Payton from Florida State, most of the best ends they face are big guys. Nick Scourton's 280. Ashton Jalot's 270. A&M's going to have two big ends at those positions. USC's going to have a really big defensive end on one of the sides of the ball, a 275-plus guy on one side of the ball. So when you look at it and you say, okay, can he hold up in those moments, right? Those are the biggest games in the schedule. He's going to be going against guys 270-plus. That's not much lighter than what he is right now. And again, the weight's not the issue, Vince. I've said it a million times. It's not the weight. He could be 285 and be just fine. It's what's his ability to anchor and move people. That's more of the question. Very athletic, super long, freaky tools. Like there's not many guys, Vince. Like most of the guys that I give 5-star upside to are guys that are in the top 100, right? Like Billy Schroeder's in the top 100. I did not give him a 5-star upside grade, because what's a 5-star upside grade? You're a top 20 NFL draft pick. That's what a 5-star guy is, right?
Okay.
Like you're the elite of the elite. Maybe Billy Schroeder can get there, but I viewed Billy more as like a late first, second round type of talent, which is really good for a guard coming out of high school. It's a top 100 player, right? But if you're the number 75 overall player in the country, you're pretty good, right? That makes you a third-round draft pick.
Crazy.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, which again, third-round draft pick's pretty good. So when I look at a guy like Emil Wagner, who was a top 250 grade for me, but he had 5-star upside. It all came down to one thing. Can he hold up at the next level? If he can, he's got a chance to be good. So if Emil wins the job, it means he's established himself as being able to do that, which means that there's going to be some weeks we're going to see some inconsistent play at right tackle. There's also going to be some weeks where he's going to be up here playing like a dude. And if you're that team that, let's say Emil starts at right tackle, and you're that team that unfortunately plays against Notre Dame the week that Charles and Emil put it together in a game, sorry for you. It's going to be a long day. It's going to be a really long day for your defensive ends, because they're both studs. They're both 5-star upside guys, and their potential is enormous. But the question is Emil there yet? The good news for me is Emil he struggled a little bit in the Jersey scrimmage. Again, with the, just in pass pro. Because the funny thing is, a lot of people think Emil is going to be great in pass pro because he's long. He's very long. He's 6'6" with crazy length.
Yep.
And he's athletic. All right. All great traits, but that's the position where I've said I'm most concerned because that's where he struggled most in practice. Why? Because he's light. And when you are in pass pro, you are receding.
Yep.
You're not an aggressor. You're on defense, essentially. Right? You're defending your zone, your area. The defensive player is the one actually attacking.
Right.
He's the one going on offense in regard to how we're going against each other. And so when you're a light guy with a light lower body, a thin lower body, and you're receding and a 275-pound guy is coming at you full steam and you're going backwards, that can be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my concern with Emil. Is that right there? If he is good, if he can handle himself there, the sky's the limit for this kid, which is why he had a 5-star upside, right? But it's also why I could not, in good conscience, put him in the top 100 coming out of high school, because like there's no way that guy steps into the starting lineup his first 2 years and plays, no way. And guess what? He didn't. Billy Schrouth did. He should have started much sooner than the game he did as a redshirt freshman. That's a different story for another day, or a story we've already had. We've already told that one. But, by his redshirt freshman year, Billy Schroff was ready to go. Ashton Craig was ready to go. Emil was not. Why? Weight. Ability to hold up at the point of attack. That's going to be the question for Emil. But what we saw in the spring game, however, Vince, Emil was as solid as they had. I mean, him and Rocco were both super rock solid. Emil didn't have any great blocks in the spring game, but he was steady. He didn't get pushed around. That was a great sign for me. Like, that was like, okay, we know he can do it. Yes, it was a blue gold game, but he was going against RJ Oben. He was going against Boubacar. He was going against some dudes. He wasn't going against the number 2s. You know what I mean? He was going against some of their top guys, and he held his own. And that was a great sign.
Yes.
I'm going to have, when I drop an intel piece either later this week or early next week, there's going to be some conversation about Emil Wagner in there about how his summer's going.
Okay.
But I'll just say this. There's some optimism that he might have finally figured it out in a lot of different ways.
Hey, that's good
news.
If
that's true, that is where this line for 24 has its most upside. So That's what I say. Tosh solidifies the floor. Emil raises the ceiling. That's what's at stake in this battle at right tackle.
So at right tackle, though, if let's say one of these guys isn't doing what they should do, or there's a guy that could come out of nowhere, for example. So you said there's two wild cards. Well, you know what I mean. A guy that is not a primary battler for the position, but a wild card, as that's the term you use. So we'll go ahead and use that one. So 2 wild card guys that could make a push. And even here's what's important. I think people need to understand as well. And I have seen this so many times as a coach. Okay. And so many times, even as a player, I remember this, if you don't have somebody pushing you as the starter, if you're not intrinsically motivated, and look, you want everybody that's at Notre Dame on scholarship to be internally motivated and not have to have external motivation, right? But we're all human. And when there's somebody breathing down your neck, you're either going to fold or you're going to raise your game. I like to think the people at Notre Dame are going to raise their game when somebody is pushing them from behind. That's what I would like to think. So these wild card guys that you're going to talk about aren't just, hey, there's a chance that one of these guys might start. Okay, cool. But are they raising their game enough that they are now pushing one of these guys, whether it's Tosh or Emil or whoever, pushing these guys to even raise their game to another level? I think that's what people kind of forget about, and they forget about the fact that, hey, he's second string, it doesn't matter. If you're getting pushed every single day, that's why certain schools, even at the high school level, are so good, because their depth is so good. They get pushed every day in practice, so the starter has to be on their game, because if they're not, there's a guy right here ready to take your spot. So with all that said, who are the wild cards for the right tackle position?
There's 2. One is the backup left tackle, Sullivan Absher, and the other is Gerby Lambert. Gerby Lambert, just because he's a freak. I mean, I try not to use. I've been using that word a lot more lately, and I've thought about it because, like, when I say words a lot, I'm like, okay, am I if I use the word elite a lot or great or freak, okay, am I overusing that word? And I think in reporting and analysis, you can start to use buzzwords a little bit too much. And sometimes if you use a word too much, it loses its sting. We see that in society and politics. You call somebody a name so many times and everyone that you don't like is that name, it just loses its sting. And now it's like, okay, whatever, we're all that way. So I don't really care what you think anymore, right? So you start thinking about like, okay, these freaks that I talk about, that he is. Yeah, that guy is. Yeah. They're just recruiting more of those. That's really what it comes down to,
Sure.
And when you look at a guy like Gerby Lambert, you're talking about a kid that as a true freshman showed up at 6'7", 318. And I saw a picture of him, Vince. He does not have bad weight on him. Like I was like 318, that's like 20, 30 pounds bigger than what he was in high school. Like, did he just eat a bunch of cheeseburgers this summer? You're like, nope. He's just a monster of a young man. Is he going to be able to come in and play as a freshman? That's asking a lot, but he's that good, right? And he's got 35+ inch arms. I mean, his length is insane. His athleticism and his power is all really, really good. It would be foolish to just say, well, he's not going to play. It'd be foolish to say that. Now, I don't think he's going to win the starting right tackle job. I think he'll probably need a year. There's a lot of great players in Notre Dame that needed a year of development. I'll name you some. Zach Martin, Ronnie Stanley, Quentin Nelson, Mike McGlinchey, Liam Eichenberg. I mean, there's been a lot of those guys along the way, right? Very rarely do you have guys that play as freshmen. And usually when they do, it's because of injury. Joe Walt only started in 2021 because 3 other guys got hurt, including a freshman in Blake Fisher, who started because that's how weak the position was. The only other exception is Robert Hainsey, who was just that good. But who was Robert Hainsey going against? A redshirt freshman. So it wasn't like he was beating out a third-year starter at right tackle or a fifth-year senior or a redshirt sophomore like what Gerby's going against. Robert Hainsey probably would have had a tougher time winning a co-starting job in 2017 if Tommy Kramer was in his third year instead of just his second. So he's going to be one. And Sullivan Absher's one you have to look at, Vince, because yes, right now he's a left tackle, but if he's out there balling with the number 2 at left tackle and he's doing what, another guy that there's a lot of excitement about, if he's doing well at left tackle and you're not thrilled with what you're seeing at right tackle, hey, Sully, why don't you go ahead and go back to playing right-handed like you did in high school and let's see what you can do over right tackle. That's what you're going to do. And so to your point, Vince, Emil and Tosh are not just being pushed by each other. They're going to get pushed by 2 other monsters. One kid's 6'7", 320, and the other kid's 6'7", 325. And they're studs. And they're guys that we think can be really good players and thought when they signed with Notre Dame. The question for Sullivan is going to be, for Gerby, it's just overall lack of experience. He's a true freshman who wasn't here in the spring. That's a tough ask.
That's
a real tough ask.
Agreed.
And, so like maybe like Jagas, because remember Jagas was a guy that didn't have the spring at Notre Dame either. And he was not ready at all until really
late in the year.
Yes.
Yes. When you get 6 months in the weight room,
he played in the last game of the year at guard.
Right.
When they went to their second team offensive line against Stanford, they put him in at guard, right? But the light kind of went on, and he's, big kid. Now, you look at Gerby, and he's in a similar situation. He's a true, immensely talented, but a true freshman offensive lineman. There's reasons why I literally just listed to you a bunch of first-round draft picks that did not play as freshmen. And then the only one that did play as a freshman, Joe Walt, was literally the fourth option for that football team at tackle.
He had number 45 on. Remember?
Carmody got hurt. He had 45. Carmody got hurt. Tosh got hurt, and Blake got hurt. Then they went to Joe Walt.
Correct.
Right? So it's a tough ask to sit there and think that this kid's going to come in a day one win a starting job. And again, he's not going against bums. You know what I mean? Like, these are good players. So then you look at Sullivan, and Sullivan's thing is he's now transitioning into his second year. He's still learning the pass pro aspects of it. When you watch Sully in the bowl game and you watch Sully in the spring game, you're like, that guy's a monster. He just moves people. Then you watch him in pass pro, and you're like, yeah, he came from a triple option offense. You know what I mean? He's still learning that.
But he knows how to move people.
That's why he's going to be a wild card at multiple positions, because I still believe Sullivan's best position is still inside. But we'll see how that shakes out. But he's the guy that you look at and say, if the light goes on for Sullivan Absher, he's the type of kid that is an offensive line coach. If you're good at your job, when the light goes on for Sullivan Absher, you don't say, yeah, but he's my backup to Jagas. You say, figure it out.
Top 5.
Right? If you're Marcus Freeman and Mike Denbrock, you go to Joe Rudolph and say, he's one of our best 5. Figure it out. Is it left guard? Is it right tackle? Is it right guard? And you move Billy to left. I don't know what the answer is. It left tackle and you move Jagasol to right? There's all types of figure it out, right? Figure it out because that kid needs to be on the field.
Right.
Sullivan Absher has that kind of talent. The crazy thing is so does Gerby Lambert. And that's, again, where you start getting excited about this offensive line. The first half of the show, I was literally feeling a lot of, oh, boy, man, the more I repeat the lack of experience, the more concerned I get. Then you get into this part, and this is why we split it into 2 sections, Vince, because it is this unique dichotomy.
Yeah.
Then you start talking about the individual talent, like, holy moly, there's a lot of talent on this offensive line. Like, Sullivan Absher's not even a starter for you? Like, Sullivan Absher would have – year 2 Sullivan Absher would have started probably for last year's team. Year 2 Sullivan Absher absolutely beats out 2023 version of Pat Coogan and Rocco Spindler. No problem, in my opinion. He starts in 2022 most likely. He starts in 2021 for sure as a second-year player. You don't think he would have beat out either Zeke Carrell or your boy? You know I'm talking about, Vince. I can't even say the name.
Don't.
You know what I mean? Like, literally, year 2 Sully Absher starts on the last 3 offensive lines in Notre Dame. He may not start on this one. Why? Because it's really talented. And because guys like Coogan and Rocco do have more experience under the belt.
Exactly.
Now, so, that's where you look at Vince and you say, but if the light goes on for that kid, Sullivan, Gerby, Billy, and Charles in a meal, those are the 5 that you look at and say, if the light goes on for those 5, they're the ones you have to say, you got to figure something out. Got to figure something out. Now, the light's not going to go on for all 5 of them at the same time. It's just not. But what I'm saying is they're the type of guys that when the light goes on, you got to do something. You got to do something. And I don't know what that is. But to me, that's why I say Sullivan could, he was a right tackle in high school. He's playing left tackle now. He could, it'd be easier for him to move over to right tackle than it is for him to play left tackle, in my opinion, because he's so much more comfortable doing it. He's done it for so long. So he's absolutely a guy that you got to look at and say. And here's the other thing, too. Gerby and Sully are both natural right tackles. Natural meaning it's what they've done. I think Gerby has left tackle talent easily. He's just never done it. He's always been a right tackle. That helps with that move, right? And that's the key.
Let's shift over to left guard. You were kind of talking about Sullivan Absher being a guy that could play in a lot of different positions. There is a battle going on at left guard. And interestingly enough, the primary battle is between the 2 starting guards from last year in Pat Coogan and Rocco Spindler. And again, wild card of Sullivan Absher potentially being there as well. This is an interesting battle because you've got 2 guys who play differently. I mean, they have different styles of play. And so that may come into it as well and may be a factor in this battle. Does Mike Denbrock want more of a road grader? Does he want more of a guy who is going to be assignment sound, but maybe not as, strong in the booty? What kind of offense do they want out of the left guard? And then who's going to step up and take that spot? I mean, these are all legitimate questions, in my opinion, for this position. And then you throw in Sullivan Absher, and it's like, boys, you better be on your game if you want to hold off this guy. You know what I mean? And so I just find this one fascinating just because of the 2 different styles of play between the 2 primary guys that are competing for the position.
Yeah, because why will Pat Coogan be the starter? It's because he just does his job.
Yep.
Doesn't do it very impressively. He's dependable from I know what I'm supposed to do
from an assignment standpoint. Right. And look, you've coached with guys that same kind of guys that I've coached with. They don't necessarily care if they get the job done, but they know they don't have to worry about if this kid's going to go to the right spot and at least compete at that. You know what I mean? Like,
it's understandable. but
Yeah.
it's one of the most annoying things about
Yes.
offensive line coaches.
1000%.
No.
Could not agree more.
Offensive line coaches and quarterback coaches. Two most annoying people on the planet because they so overstate experience.
Yes.
And it's like, well, how can this young guy figure it out if you don't play him?
Correct.
I mean, that's the frustrating thing. And so you get to it, and I was having this conversation with somebody the other day, and it was just like, yeah, but we know that Pat's going to do his job. You don't know that Rocco's going to always do his job. And I'm like, I don't care. Like, because here's the thing. Rocco's going to give up a tackle for loss or a sack because he steps wrong, or you're right. Pat's going to do it just because somebody kicks the crap out of him. Right? Same result. But a coach will look at that and say, well, yeah, but he tried and he knew what he was supposed to do. They'll look at that and be less upset than when a guy steps wrong and gets beat because he stepped wrong or his footwork wasn't right. I'm like, yeah, but the result was the exact same thing. Yeah, but I don't want to hear any freaking buts. It's the exact same thing.
Because when they're right, this guy kicks his
tail. Exactly. Yeah. And that's the thing that to me, it's like Rocco's just gonna have to take a step back for me not start him at left guard. That's just me. I don't know that Notre Dame views it that way. I have no clue if they view it that way. When I say I don't know, I mean I literally don't know. I don't have a clue how Joe. I've never had a conversation with Joe Rudolph. I have no clue what he thinks about this topic. I'll just simply say if it's going to be about, well, we got to start the steady guy. Okay, fine. You've limited yourself.
But
you've limited yourself. That's the problem.
Correct.
And I still think with all his issues, Rocco was still better than Pat last year.
Okay,
for me,
fair enough. But Pat started over Billy last year. So is this
because of that? Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. Isn't this the exact conversation that we're having? Talent versus experience when it comes to Billy Shroud versus Pat Coogan.
The difference, though, this isn't talent versus experience because Rocco and Billy are in this, or Rocco and Pat are in the same class.
That is true.
And I don't think they're going to say, well, he's got 3 more career starts. I don't think that's going to matter. It's going to be about Rocco, Billy with Pat. You know what to expect. I know where he's not good, so I can do things as a line coach to protect him. If they got a 3 techniques just kicking the crap out of him, then we know we got to do certain things to protect him. Okay, I understand all that. With Rocco, it's like I don't know what to expect from snap to snap. That's the frustration.
Sure.
Because with Pat, it's like, look, I know when they play Florida State, if Pat Coogan's got to block Josh Farmer all game, it's not going to go well for Notre Dame. Just not. He's going to need help. Because Josh Farmer will kick his butt in one-on-one matchups. Just going to happen, right? And with Rocco, it's like, you know what? I think Rocco can go toe-to-toe with Josh Farmer. And then there's going to be the 3 or 4 snaps where Rocco doesn't set his feet or move his feet or, does something technically wrong, and he gives up an inside lane and the guy blows the play up. I mean, that's where they come down to it. It's like, I know who Pat is. I know that Pat needs help against Josh Farmer. I know he needs help against Shamar Turner. I understand that, but he's going to know what to do every single snap, and we can game plan around that. I think that's a bit of a cop-out, to be honest with you. My thing is then you figure out a way to get this other guy going. That's the key, because when this guy's ceiling is here, that gives you your chance to be the best offensive line you can have. And if for some reason that guy just can't figure it out, then put somebody in younger. Like I like Pat Coogan. I think he's a great kid. He's the ultimate swing backup. He can play either guard spot. He can play center. That's the role where he'd be great to have. Not everybody's meant to be a starter. And it's not personal against Pat. I love the kid because he's going to – here's the thing why you love a guy like Pat Coogan. You know a game is never going to end where Pat didn't leave it all out on the field.
Absolutely.
I've never watched him play. We're like, dude, Pat Coogan's not even trying today. Never had that concern. You just say, dude's not good enough to play against those type of guys. He's just not. He's not. And that's the difference. And so they've got to figure out a way to then get the more talented players ready to then execute at a higher level. Because in fairness, Vince, I can't have a guy with 10 MAs at guard no matter how good he is on the other 50 snaps.
Completely agree. Because those 10 could be massive in
your quarterback gets knocked out, it's 3rd and 2, you get blown up. I mean, like that's the thing is like you have to. So like part of me, it drives me nuts about offensive line coaches, but you also understand why they're that way. Because an MA from a receiver, quarterback sees it and he throws the ball away or goes somebody else. An MA by your left tackle, your quarterback's getting ear hold. I mean, that's the difference. The stakes are higher when an O lineman has an MA. By the way, I'm sorry, missed assignment is what that stands for. Yeah, I know you had it, and I know a lot of people, I didn't want to assume that everybody knew what that meant. So like that's the thing with Rocco. Like you got to take your 5 to 10 MAs a game and turn them down to 2 to 5, right? Like that's the reality of it. You've got to limit those. You've got to limit those mistakes because somebody just said Brian's such a quarterback receivers RB coach. No, I'm a football coach. I'm an offensive coach, and I understand that you say, well, it's very limiting to have an offensive lineman that's having MAs, and I would say as a quarterback, it's also very limiting when my left guard's getting the crap kicked out of him the entire game. You know what I mean? Or I can't get movement on this side of the line when I'm trying to call a game, and my left tackle is a stalemate every time because a stalemate up front is a win for the defense. Flat out. It's a win for the defense. And so that's
a lot of times that's all you're asking the defense to do.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
Because offensive linemen are trying to move guys. They're trying to move them out of the way. And a stalemate you're at 100% right. Stalemate's a win for the defense because you have either blocked the hole.
Got to get movement.
You got to move. Got to move.
Pat doesn't move people.
No, he doesn't.
Rocco moves people.
Correct.
Absher moves people.
Correct.
Billy Schrouth moves people. Ashton Craig moves people, and that's the problem. So you're going to have this big, massive 6'7", 330-pound left tackle, and you're going to put a guy next to him that just kind of does his job. You're limiting yourself. You're now limiting the effectiveness of a guy like Charles Jagas now. Yep. You say, well, no, he's actually helping Billy because when they do combos together, they get moving. I understand all that. But what about when they face a more experienced player? You're now asking Charles Jagas to carry your senior from a talent standpoint or a production standpoint. And then, but he's going to help Charles know what to do all the time. Oh, okay. Billy does. If Rocco doesn't know the offense, he's a senior. What are you doing here? So those are the things I look at, Vince, when you start talking about the offensive line. You say you've got to find a balance in that world. But when the talent gap is that different, you figure it out. You look at the blue gold game and you say, I got to get 50 to play like that every week. I've got to get number 50 to play like that every week. Because if they can get Rocco Spindler to play every game like he did, like you take his 5 best games, you say, look, you got to figure out a way to get him to do that every week. That's your job as an O-line coach.
Coaching.
Figure it out.
Coaching.
Figure it out. Get that guy. I need him to do that every single week. Because when he's that, we are really freaking good. Really good. When he's not, then we're not good. But we're not good over there anyway. The good news is this, Vince. No matter who starts at left guard, it's going to be better than it was last year. Because Pat's not going to regress. He's too tough a kid. He's too experienced. He's too smart to be worse than he was last year, in my opinion. So at least you're going to be where you were last year, if not better. Now you have the same physical limitations, but those physical limitations now have 13 career starts under their belt, right? That's the difference. But at the end of the day, you start thinking about what's the quote-unquote dream scenario for Notre Dame. Rocco wins the left tackle job and Emil wins the right tackle job. And you know what? You're going to have some ups and downs early. Mm-hmm. But when you get that group to November.
Right, exactly.
And you've got to look at it differently now, Vince, because you are in this era of the college football 12-team playoff, which means you now have a chance to maybe stub your toe early.
Yeah, for sure.
No, like here's the thing. If I told you all as fans, this offensive line that I'm going to put on the field that's going to have Rocco at left tackle and Emil at right tackle, or left guard and Emil at right tackle, it's going to maybe get us beat against Texas A&M. But it's going to give us a chance to win 4 games in the postseason. You'd take that trade, right? But if I told you this guy right here is going to help us beat Texas A&M, but it's going to make it harder to win the final 4 games, like that's kind of the dichotomy that you have at these positions. 2 guys are just steady. They're going to do their job more often than not, but from an assignment standpoint, but they're going to get beat because they're just not physically good enough. That's Pat. That's Tosh. The other 2 kids in the consideration are Rocco, who is going to have some MAs, but when he's on, he's dominant, and then Emil, who's going to be similar. Like that's what's in front of Joe Rudolph. Do I take the guys that I know what they're going to give me, which lowers the floor, or do I just say we're going to go all in on talent and figure it out and get those guys ready? Because by the time we get to October, November, because if you can just somehow get through the A&M game, your next 3 weeks are get-right games, with all due respect to Purdue, who I actually think could be a decent team this year, but they're just going to be they're not going to be nearly as good as Notre Dame.
Right.
But Miami of Ohio, Northern Illinois, really good MAC teams, but really good MAC teams are inferior to Notre Dame. And so those are, hey, get it right until Louisville. And so that's where Notre Dame is, because I want to go into Louisville with my most talented guys in the field. That's just where I'm at. And it's your job to figure that out as a coach. Figure it out. Get those guys on the field, because – and so you say, am I rooting for those guys? I'm not rooting for those guys. That's my analysis.
Right.
They're at their best potential is when these kids are on the field.
Correct. I'm rooting for the best 5. I'm rooting for the best 5.
I'm not even rooting. I'm just simply saying, like, I understand what you're saying. You're kind of, I'm saying, I'm not rooting. This is what I see.
Yeah.
You want to be the best team you can be. That's the more talented guy. Play him. It's not rooting, because the guy that I actually root for the most, I root for Tosh and Pat Coogan more, because they're better stories. They're better personal. Like Pat Coogan, it's not a kid that you normally don't think is a Notre Dame caliber kid. He wasn't a highly ranked kid, didn't have a great offer list. I love stories like that. If Tosh finished his career on a really high note, what a great redemption story that would be. Highly ranked kid, doesn't pan out, goes through some adversity, ends up with a great final season. Those are great personal stories. Though I actually root for those.
Right.
As a football coach, however, and as an analyst, I'm just telling you, that 5 right there gives you the best chance to go be dominant. And if you want to win 16 games, you got to be dominant. Just getting the job done at two positions out of 5, and then you're young at a couple others, is not going to go out there and win you 16 games. It's just not. It's not going to get you to play 16 games, much less win them. That's the difference.
So talking about the best 5, talking about the depth that is in this offensive line room, we need to talk about the interior of this offensive line. What is the makeup of it? Why is it a strength of this offensive line? Because, we've talked about this before. There's so much depth in the interior. I mean, you can't go wrong with a handful of guys that could play the interior of this offensive line and still be a very, very good offensive line. So there's going to be some disappointment in this room, because there's guys with a lot of talent that would have played other years. To your point earlier, when you were talking about Sullivan Absher would have played on the last 3 offensive lines at Notre Dame, and he's looking at being a backup on this offensive line. There's a lot of other guys that kind of fit that bill on the interior in this room that play interior, I should say. So let's talk about the depth of the interior offensive line and why that's so important.
Well,
to this
real quick
group.
though, speaking of left guard, I think it's worth at least mentioning. This is the second place where where Sullivan Absher is a wild card. Because if you're not, because here's the thing, all the stuff we just talked about.
Oh yeah.
With Coogan's limitations are physical. Rocco, like physicality and athleticism. Rocco doesn't lack physicality or size. He lacks athleticism. Somebody in the chat's talking about, I don't like him going against Shamar Turner. I'm like, well, you like Pat Coogan going against Shamar Turner?
Right.
And his answer was no. Oh, okay, exactly.
Right.
Right. So give me your guy that's got the best chance to overpower that guy. But there is a young guy on the roster that has the size, power, and athleticism to play there.
Yeah.
And that is Sullivan Absher. Now, is he ready to be that guy? It's a whole different animal talking about a senior that's got 10 starts under his belt compared to a redshirt freshman who's played mop-up minutes.
100%.
Like, that's the concern. And so that's what you have to look at. It's like, if you don't like the play of the 2 veterans, it's like, this just isn't good enough. You got to go over here, because like there's still people in the chat that just don't understand this. Somebody says you got to go. So this is a comment that somebody made in the chat. I disagree. Do not go on the field with the best talent. Go on the field with the players that give you the best opportunity to win. That's the same exact thing. You can't beat the best teams with guys like Pat Coogan and Tosh Baker as 2 of your 5 starters. There's no evidence you can. There's none. We saw that last year. We saw the left guard get beat so bad that there was one play he got driven back so bad that he then forced Joe Alt to trip over him and fall down. Like, we saw him get destroyed by Louisville. We saw him get whooped by Clemson. You can't beat the best teams with those guys in the starting lineup. Your best chance to beat those teams is to figure out a way to get your best talent on the field. That's what coaches do. Because otherwise, you get locked into this stupid cycle of I'm always going to play the older player. Because there's always going to be somebody that knows the offense more than you do. So you're going to say, okay, well, I'm going to start this quarterback because he's been in the system longer. So if Clemson would have taken that mentality, they would have kept Kelly Bryant on the field in 2018 and not figured out a way to get Trevor Lawrence going. Right? I mean, just from what you know Kelly Bryant can lead you to the playoff. He did it the year before.
Correct.
But you know Trevor gives you a chance to win a title. You're going to take your lumps early, but you know he's going to give you a chance to win a title. That's the difference. That's what he provides. That's what those guys provide. And so your job as a coach is to say, I'm going to get the best person. It would have been very easy for Mike Mickens early in 2022 to say, look, Clarence knows the defense better. He's the guy that I know for sure right now can go out there and execute. Or did he say, I've got this really talented freshman who's my most talented player. I got to figure out a way to get him on the field. And he did. And look what happened. So this excuse of, well, use you guys, use your best chance to win. What evidence do we have that Pat Coogan and Tosh Baker give Notre Dame the best chance to win against the best teams? What evidence do you have of that other than but they started games? What? And response is, we may be able to beat teams with our current O coordinator and with a much better quarterback this year. So what you're saying is they're going to have other players that are going to allow you to win in spite of those players. That doesn't exactly make your argument any better. It actually makes your argument worse. Now you're saying you need a quarterback and a coordinator to bail you out of those guys not being good. It's a flawed argument. You've got to figure out a way. These coaches make they make a lot of freaking money to do just this. Take your best players and get them ready to play. That's your job. It's not meant to be easy. It's easier with more experienced players. It's easier. They know what to do. But easy doesn't get you wins over A&M. Easy doesn't get you wins over Louisville. Easy doesn't get you wins over Florida State. Easy doesn't get you wins on the road against USC. Easy doesn't beat Georgia. Easy doesn't beat Texas. Easy doesn't beat Bama. Easy doesn't beat Michigan. Easy doesn't beat Oregon. Easy doesn't win you those games. You've got to be able to go talent for talent with those teams. And when you have the talent to do it, it's your job as a coach to get them ready to play. That's it. I've had coaches tell me that. There was one year, Vince, we were having some injuries as a receiver. We had this kid on defense who wasn't real smart. And the coach came over and said, hey, listen, he's 6'4", he's 205, he runs a 4.5 at the Division III level. Figure it out. All right. Got him ready to go. He went and played. 2002 at Muhlenberg. We were having some issues at fullback. We had this linebacker named Chris Brown, who was a really athletic kid. Didn't know the offense. Coach's instructions were really simple. Figure it out. We did. Guess what? Had our first playoff season in school history. Had an All-American running back, partly because our fullback was so freaking dangerous. That's what coaches do. Figure it out. Get your best players ready to play. We're not talking about Rocco Spindler being a redshirt freshman. He's a freaking senior. And if he's not ready to go, then get Sullivan Absher ready to go. Like, that's the reality, because otherwise you're limiting yourself one way or the other. You're either limiting yourself by your lack of experience or you're limiting yourself with your lack of talent. Here's the reality of coaching. Less experienced players can gain more experience. Guys with no talent don't gain more talent as they play more. It is that easy. You can't gain experience without ever playing a guy. That's a loser's mentality. And apparently we have some of that in the chat today. You can't gain experience without freaking playing. You understand that, right? Think about how Billy Schrouth looked in the last 3 games of the year. You're telling me that Billy Schrouth did not become the most talented guard, the best guard on the roster until the week of the Wake Forest game? That's when the just light went on and he was like, well, it just so coincided with Rocco Spindler's injury. It's a total coincidence that Billy Schrouth was ready to play and step in and be the best guard. The 2 best games they had all year from a guard were 2 of the 3 games that Billy Schrouth played in. Is that a coincidence? It just so happened to time out that way when Rocco got hurt? Or maybe Billy was that guy for weeks and they never played him, so you didn't see it. I'm just saying. I could do this all day because there's evidence of this for decades where they just well, I guess we got to play this guy. And all of a sudden, remember when we would complain about, I'm trying to remember who it was. Was it Logan Diggs? There's a couple running backs where it's like, guy just miraculously ready to play the minute you put him on the field. You don't play him all year. And then when he finally has to play because of injury, you're like, wow, this guy's pretty good. Well, he didn't just figure it out. You know, it's like Kyron Williams gets thrust in the starting lineup in 2020. It's pretty flipping good. You couldn't have used him the year before? You're telling me he was that much better in 2020 than he was in 2019? I'm supposed to believe that? Or maybe you didn't know he was that good because you never freaking played him. So we've kind of been down this road a million times, Vince. A million times. And you get the same loser mentality. Yeah, but I know what I have here. Yeah, it's not good enough. That's what you know you have. You know you can't beat the best teams with that at left tackle or right tackle and left guard. You can't. How do I know that? Because I've seen them not win those games with guys like that on the offensive line.
Yep.
Just saw it last year. And if you're wondering whether or not I'm right or wrong here, I'll just give you, go watch the Duke game. Go watch the Louisville game. Then come back and talk to me about experience. And we'll have some fun with that. Okay? But that's the reality is you've got to figure out a way as a coach to get your best players ready to go. As true freshmen, I'm not asking them to do that. We said it with Gilbert Lambert. That's a big ask. Mm-hmm. That's a big ask for a guy that's a first semester player. None of the guys we're talking about are first-year guys. We're talking about guys that at minimum are in their 3rd semesters of college. If you can't get those guys ready to play, maybe you're not the guy. Maybe I need to go get somebody that is that guy. You know, I mean, I watched Harry Heastand win a Joe Moore Award with a redshirt freshman and a true freshman playing right tackle. He figured it out. Found a way to get it done. It wasn't a limiting position for them. So go get it done. I mean, that's as simple as that, Vince.
Yes, sir.
And you can keep holding on to these things that have got you beat for so long. Right? The way you've been doing it in Notre Dame the last 30 years isn't working anymore. It's never worked. So maybe try something different. Maybe do, I don't know, what Ohio State and Alabama and those teams do. They got their young players. I mean, Caden Proctor wasn't ready to be a starter game 1 last year. They put him in anyway. By the end of the year, it's much better. Right? I mean, that's what good teams do. Mm-hmm. Mitch Hyatt started as a true freshman at Clemson. Go back and watch some of the early games that year. He wasn't that good. By the end of the year, he was a starter on the national championship team. Because imagine this, with experience, he got better. Woohoo! Who'd have thunk it? But you know those guys that don't have much talent, the more you play them, all of a sudden they don't actually get more talented.
Right.
It's funny how that works. One can be fixed by playing, one can't. Experience can be fixed by gaining experience. So that's my O-line rant. Because it inherently every year. Same conversation. Well, you know, that's how you talk yourself into going and getting Kane Madden out of the portal. That's how you talk yourself into that conversation.
Right.
That's how you talk yourself into playing Michael Carby and Tosh Baker over Joe Alt in 2021. That's how you talk yourself into that. Well, but these are veteran guys, they know the system. That's how you talk yourself into those type of decisions as a coach. Mm-hmm. Is by that right there. And hopefully Joe Rudolph's better than that. Fingers crossed.
Absolutely. So we did break down the right tackle situation. We're doing the whole offensive line, so I do want to talk about left tackle. Now, there's not a competition going on over there, but there is still a first-time starter in Charles Jagas. And again, yes, I know he started the bowl game, but first time starting to begin the season as your projected start of the rest of the year, and that's what I mean by
whole different level of pressure going
100%
than playing in the Sun Bowl on a neutral field against.
And we've talked about that a million times. There's a big difference between being the presumptive starter, for the whole season, and then basically coming off the bench for a bowl game, and that's it. I mean, it's a big difference. So he's a first-time starter. He doesn't have any competition over there per se. So Charles Jagas, sophomore, starting left tackle at Notre Dame, huge shoes to fill, obviously, with Joe Alt, figuratively, literally, all of it. So thoughts on Charles and what he's going to be able to do this year?
Well, Vince, the whole problem with this is we keep talking about Joe Alt.
Yeah, I know, right?
That really is the problem because, and I think that's the problem a lot of other people have is because they start holding him to that standard, and the reality is that's not fair to hold him to.
That's not fair.
That's not about not being fair. It's just not realistic.
Well, that's what I mean by that. It's like, look, Joe Alt wasn't Joe Alt when he started his first set of games either.
But I don't even expect Charles Jagas to be Joe Alt from his sophomore season, which is what Charles is going into. Like, when you get to game 8, I don't expect Charles Jagas to be as good as Joe Alt was in his 8th start. Joe Alt, again, grew up in the home of an offensive tackle from the NFL who's in the Ring of Fame for the Kansas City Chiefs.
Right.
Like, there's different levels of development for players that allow them to be able to play earlier than others. Right? Some guys are ready to be stars right away. Other guys need time.
Right.
And so when I look at Charles, the question is not, okay, is he the best guy at left tackle? I don't think that's debatable. The question is, okay, but can he play at a high enough level for this team to be successful? Mm-hmm. If you're talking about him not being the left tackle, that's to me just a waste of oxygen for now. Maybe down the road that changes. Maybe somebody steps up and says, hey, this guy is ready to be that position. Like if there is some time down the road where Notre Dame says, hey, listen, we think our best offensive line is some combination of Gerby at tackle and Emil at tackle and Sullivan at guard and Charles at guard. Okay, cool. Make that move if that gives you your best 5. But right now, there's nobody else, in my opinion, that is able to play that position. So, and I also think the other misguided aspect of it is the assumption that Charles can't play that position. I think he can. And if you say, well, he's not a natural left tackle, based on what?
Right.
So you're comparing him to the best left tackle in all of college football last year. Well, that's an unfair thing because you know who else is not going to have someone as good as Joe Alt at left tackle this year? How many teams are there in Division I college football?
Every other team in Division I college football.
That number. That's the number. However many teams are in college football, that's the number.
Correct.
Right? And so it's, okay, can Charles handle the job at a level that allows this line to be good enough to go out and win all your games? That's the question. And you've got to coach differently knowing Charles Jagas is your left tackle compared to when Joe Alt's your left tackle. That's just part of coaching. That happens. That's the progression you go towards. That's what they had to figure out in 2021, right? You had an All-American at left tackle the year before. Liam Eichenberg was as steady as could be. And in left tackle in 2021, you were going to have Blake Fisher there, and he was not going to be steady, but he was going to be good. And when he was good, you had to figure it out. You're going to have to do things with your tight ends to help him in protection, all that kind of stuff. I think Charles Jagas is going to be fine if you're evaluating him for who Charles Jagas need to be as a redshirt freshman. Right. If you're constantly going to be looking at him and say, well, Joe Alt wouldn't have missed that block or Joe Alt wouldn't have made that. Hey, guys, guess what? Every single kid on the roster right now on scholarship is going to not play as well as Joe Alt played last year. I'm just preparing you all for this as fans, okay? I'm going to make this prediction. And, Vince, I've said I wouldn't bet my mortgage on that. This is one I'm betting my mortgage on. I'm betting my mortgage that no player on the roster at Notre Dame is going to play as well as at left tackle this year as Joe Alt played last year.
I think that's a safe bet.
Okay, I'm pretty sure
that's a safe bet, right? I would say. And if for some reason that's not the case, then
get that out of your mind. It's not about, okay, you had Joe Alt there last year. I don't care about that. It's about getting the best version of Charles Jagas.
Yeah.
That's the question. Can we get the best version of Charles Jagas? And that's really, honestly, it's going to be partly up to Joe Rudolph. But like with anything else, it's like, and this is not I didn't say this during the conversation about Emil and Rocco, but there's this there as well, is you have to look at them and say, hey, are you doing all you need to do? So, I mean, yes, Joe Rudolph needs to figure some things out, but Rocco Spindler needs to make sure he's putting in the work this summer and he's got the right attitude and he's in good shape and he's improving his footwork and things like that. And then you got to say the same thing about Emil and Tosh and Pat Coogan. Like there's an individual responsibility for the players as well. And with Charles, you hope that he learned from Joe Alt sort of the how to go about your business every day. That's what you hope. And you hope he can develop a little bit more consistency for his age, right? He's never going to be as consistent as a veteran, but can he be consistent enough to thrive knowing what he does well. And that's going to be the big question mark, is because like run game wise, I'm not worried about Charles Jagas. I think he's going to be pretty good in the run game. The question is can he eliminate the misses that he had in the spring? And this is where I think people missed the boat on Charles Jagas. Let's talk about this right here, Vince. When you watch the spring game and you watch the Jersey scrimmage, you're going to see about 2 or 3 plays from Charles where you're just like, that was not good. Somebody ran right by him. And there tend to be things that happen with people when they watch offensive line play, especially people who don't like watch the offensive line, is they'll look and say, well, you know, that guy ran right by him. He's clearly not athletic enough to play that position. Maybe that could be true. That could certainly be true. It could also be true that he actually is plenty athletic enough to play offensive line, but his footwork's a problem. And he tends to, you know, have some issues with not stepping properly at times. You know, he'll step this way and have this weird hitch in his giddy up, and it caused him to get beat. So I'll give you an example, Vince. I graded the blue gold game, and I just went through each play, and you give a plus or a minus, or a plus, a minus. A plus is like a real dominant block that results in a big gain or a touchdown. A minus is like you just whiff and you give up a sack, right? Otherwise, it's a plus minus. And when you watch Charles, it's actually, I'm gonna pull it up here real quick, Vince. Let me just share this real fast. I'm gonna pull this up so people can see what I'm talking about here, and so people can read it for themselves. But I'm gonna read my analysis. This is from the message board. So if you're a premium board member, you probably already read this. So let's actually blow this up here, and I'm gonna make this a little bit bigger so people can read it. So this is my grade for Charles Jagas all coming out of spring. So out of the blue gold game. So you see his overall grade was actually pretty solid, Vince. You know, 86.9. He graded out as 85.7. In the pass game, he gave up 1 sack and 1 pressure. The problem that some people have is they remember this number right here. That's the only plays they remember from the entire game are those two, where he gave up a bad sack and gave up a bad pressure. Like he just got whooped on those plays. But here's what I read about Jagasol, because this is why people need to go back and watch the film. I said my impression of Jagasol live was different than what the reaction was from many post-game. I saw the same misplays that everyone else did, but I thought he was solid for much of the game. When I rewatched it, I had a strict eye on Jagasol, but he earned high marks. Outside of the 3 pass pro snaps where he was bad, Jagasol did a lot of really good things in the game. He was very physical in the run game and got excellent movement at the point of attack. The defense wasn't able to shoot inside of him in the run game, which would be more true if foot quickness is a problem. Maybe it was just this game, but what I saw is a big guy that in the run game looks comfortable, but plays with good pad level and whips people at the point of attack on a regular basis. Where Jagasol did have issues, I should have had there instead of had, issues was in pass pro. There were plenty of good snaps where he gets into his slide, gets outside, meets the rusher, and either stones him or rides him outside. There were a few snaps, however, where Jagasol had an issue when he would look to step out and switch hands to engage a fast rusher. That there was a hitch there, and when he did this, he would get beat outside at that moment. There was one snap I thought he was slow out of his stance getting into a slide, but that was rare. Jagasol will need to anchor a bit better in pass pro, at least from a consistent basis. He got knocked back a couple of times more than a guy with his size and strength should. So here's the point that I was making about that, Vince. So he'd be in this pass set, and he would kind of have his outside hand here, get his hands on, and when they would knock it off, he would then kind of go here. But when he would do that, he would bring his feet together, and it would cause a hitch in his step. As soon as that hitch happens, RJ Oben's going right by him. Boubacar's going right by him. Every offensive tackle in the country that would have done it technique-wise the way Charles did was going to get beat on that play by those players. That's what Charles has to figure out. That's the thing I keep hearing about Charles is he's just inconsistent. Technically and from a focus standpoint, because he's a redshirt freshman, that's going to be the case. But he's got to eliminate those type of plays, though, right? He's got to eliminate his best. Look, you're going to get beat sometimes, but what Charles has got to do, you're too big, you're too long, you're too wide, you're too athletic to let someone beat you that badly outside. So technical parts, you've got to clean up the technique. And then if you are slow out of your stance, then you can still get hands-on, ride the guy outside, and Riley can climb into the pocket, right? You've got to eliminate the run-throughs. because when you watched him play, and this is the point, is if he lacked quickness, if an offensive lineman lacks quickness, you actually don't see it as much in pass pro. Where you see it is in the run game, because guys will beat them off the ball and they're just not quick enough to get in front of or get their body on guys, right? I don't know if you agree with that, Vince, but that's how I feel at the college level. If you lack athleticism, it's going to show up even more in the run game against the better players than it will in the pass game. Because in pass game, you're going to have help. You're retreating. You're kind of giving yourself more time to kind of get in positioning. In the run game, it's just kind of like that guy kicked my butt off the ball and there's nothing I could do about it. So when you see Charles in the run game not getting beat with quickness, well, it's not an athletic problem. You watch it and it's a technical problem. He's got to clean that up. Is he an ideal left tackle? I don't know if he's an ideal left tackle for the next level. But guys, Zach Martin went from Notre Dame's a 4-year starter at left tackle to a right guard in the National Football League.
And a Pro Bowl right
one
guard.
Of the best to ever do it.
Right.
Just because you can't play it at the next level doesn't mean you can't play it at a high level in college.
Correct.
That's the reality.
That's incredibly important to understand.
Yes. So, but Charles has got to be more consistent. He's got to clean up those technical mistakes, because if you grade out at 85.7% in pass pro, that's not bad. That's a good day's work. It's not great. It's just good. The problem is his minuses were bad because he just whiffed. But it was a technical problem. That's the thing, Vince. You got to look at a guy and say, okay, does he have a problem? You're a baseball coach. You see a guy that just can't get onto the baseball. Just can't, just the fastball's just eating him up. Well, it's one of two things, Vince. Either A, he just doesn't have the bat speed to get on that ball, or B, there's something in his mechanics that's causing his trigger to be slow, which he's not getting there. So maybe he's got to start his operation a little bit sooner, right? Maybe he's got to get rid of something that's causing a get. He's going like this. He's got his bat here and he goes like this, and he doesn't have the bat speed to then come around. So you got to get it back here, right? You got to start there.
Start it off back further, yep.
And so there's all types of analogies that work in all types of sports where it's not a lack of athleticism. It's either a lack of athleticism or it's a lack of technical prowess. And you got to figure out which one it is. And with Charles, I don't see a lack of athleticism. I see a lack of technical prowess. And that's what he's got to correct. We're going to see it at times, but he's got to make sure it's not those really bad ones, because you're on the left side where a guy's coming through and 280-pound Nick Scourton puts a double move on you, your feet hit, you lose him, and he's got a free reign to hit Riley Leonard from the backside. That can't happen. That's my fear with Charles Jagas. It's those type of mistakes that are technical in nature, not physical in nature. As good as Nick Scourton is, he's 6'4", 280. Charles Jagas is 50 pounds bigger than he is, right? So the only way Nick Scourton is going to abuse Charles Jagas is if it's technical. He's got a really nice array of pass rush moves. Now, he may beat Charles Jagas, and he will. What I'm talking about, Vince, is just the straight run through where he's got a clear shot on Riley Leonard. It's not going to be because he's a way better athlete than Charles Jagas. It's going to be because he used some veteran move. Charles steps this way, Scourton goes this way, and he's toast. That's a technical problem. That's not a physical limitation.
Right.
And that's the job for Joe Rudolph with Charles. It's not, work on his footwork from a foot quickness standpoint. You always look to get, everybody does. He's got to be consistent with his assignments and consistent with his technique. That's the key. And as a whole, the offensive line has to use their hands better from what we saw last season. Joe Rudolph has to do a better job of teaching this offensive line to use their hands as weapons. That's especially true for guys like Charles, Gerby, Emil, Billy, who tend to be a lot longer, right? They especially need to do that. And so if he can learn that, then he'll be fine. But he's going to have some of these mistakes, Vince. You're just going to see it. The question is, as he gets more experience, can he lessen them more and more and more and more and eliminate some of those to where even when he does have technical mistakes, it still allows him to at least get hands-on and ride the guy outside and allow Riley to do his thing. You can't have the ones that allow for free runs of your quarterback. You can't. That's the cardinal sin of being an offensive lineman, and I don't care if it's because of athleticism. I don't care if it's because of your technique. The end result's the same. Like, as a former quarterback, if I get ear-holed, and I actually only got ear-holed like once in a game. It was my sophomore year of college against Wesley, a kid named Andre Summers. I'll never forget it because it only happened once, and because I thought I had pretty good blindside vision. But like, if my offensive line was like, well, hey, I didn't use a proper pass set. I'm like, oh, okay, well, cool then. It didn't hurt as bad. No, it freaking hurt. You know what I mean? Like, I don't care why you missed. Don't freaking miss.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Figure it out.
Yeah, figure it out. So I don't care why. Don't let it happen.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, the why doesn't change the result.
Yeah.
It just doesn't. The why comes down to, okay, can I fix it or not?
Right.
That's the difference. Can I fix this? Okay, a guy that's talented that lacks experience, I can fix that. A guy that lacks talent but has all the experience in the world, I can't fix. Like, there's nothing you could have done to fix Kane Madden in 2021. He is who he is. Why? Because he just lacked the athleticism. And great kid, try-hard kid, played his butt off, just wasn't good enough. Right? I mean, and there's nothing you could have done as a coach to fix that.
Yeah, and he shouldn't have been put in that position as the year went on. But
right.
That's a different conversation, too.
So that's the thing with Charles, because Charles is important. Because, like, here's the thing, Vince. I expect the interior to be pretty good. I think with Craig, Schrouth, and even if it's Coogan, right, I think the interior is going to be pretty good for the most part, for most of the season, right? Like, there's going to be some you won 10 games last year with Pat Coogan as your left guard, right? Like, I mean, so like if we're being honest and fair, you're going to win a lot of football games if Pat Coogan and Tosh Baker started.
Oh, sure.
Our thing is, are you going to beat the best teams? Are you going to win championship? And here's the deal. If Pat Coogan, Billy Schrouth, and Ashton Craig are the starting interior offensive line, Vince, we've actually seen 3 games with these guys playing together. 3. And in those 3 games, Notre Dame scored 45, 56, and 40 points. And they averaged 251.3 rushing yards per game. That's pretty good.
That's pretty good. Now, who is competition?
Oregon State in a bowl game.
Okay.
Stanford and Wake Forest. Well, they play Stanford this year. They play Wake Forest caliber teams, and they're going to play Oregon State caliber teams. There aren't a lot of teams they're going to play. They're going to be better than that Oregon State D-line.
That's fair.
Right?
Because, everybody, it was all the backups. Not up front, it wasn't.
Exactly.
Not up front.
Right. And one of their DNs transferred to Florida State and is going to be part of their DN rotation at Florida State.
There you go.
So, but they dominated it, right? Like that's the point.
Oh,
They didn't just put up, they dominated those guys. And that's the difference, especially the last 2 games, because they were okay against Wake Forest, but they were dominant against Stanford and Oregon State.
Right.
And that's the key. So does that mean that they're going to dominate Texas A&M? Heck no. The point is, however, they're going to be good there. The question is going to be on the edges. Mm-hmm. Like, I think Billy Schrouth, we talked about him. I think he's got a chance to be a star. The guy that we don't talk enough about is Ashton Craig.
Oh, so true.
And it's just because he's a guy, Vince, that I think if he's got to build on what he did last year, in my opinion. And we'll find out if he did. But if you're really good up the middle and your tackles can't figure it out, then you're going to be in trouble against the best teams in your schedule.
Yeah.
But at least, Vince, you have, and I'll kick this to you, as a coach, if you're going to ask me, I'm going to be a little shaky at one position and really good at the other, meaning interior, exterior. For me, and I want to get your opinion, if you tell me I'm going to be shaky at one, okay, but against the better teams, a little shaky, I'd rather be really good up the middle and a little shaky on the edge than the other way around.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with that because, number one, I want to be able to run the football, and I want to be able to run the football up the middle. And there's things I can do to combat guys coming off the edge. I can run up the middle. I can get the ball outside. I don't have to run the ball outside. I can get the ball outside in some different ways. So I can schematically be okay with some iffy play on the outside. But if I'm solid on the inside, number one, my quarterback and my play calling is not going to be as affected, because if you're getting pressure up the middle, there's stuff you can't do. I mean, because you can't even get the play started. I mean, there's just nothing you can do, right? So if you're giving me the option, I want to be stronger up the middle than I do on the outside, because there's things I can schematically do about the outside. It's not ideal.
And obviously, you're not going to win a championship if you're shaky at either spot.
No, not at all. I mean, again, there's things I can do.
We're trying to make a point.
Successful. Yes,
right. We're trying to make a point of
exactly
starting off, where would I like to be stronger?
Right. Because if my center and my guard are getting pushed back so far that they're messing up my mesh point, or they're stepping on my quarterback when he's trying to get his, steps in, or, all of those different things. Pressure up the middle is a killer to an offense. It's an absolute killer. I'm talking about this with my buddy, who's an offensive line coach, and I watch his film from practice, and he's having a bit of an issue at center. And it's like, dude, you better get this figured out, because if your center is doing some of the things that he's doing right now, and he's not stepping quick enough, and he's not being able to move, there's nothing you can do with pressure right up the gut like that. There's nothing you can have the explosive guys all over the place. But if there's a guy right in your quarterback's face all the time, there's nothing you can do. So I 100% agree with that. You've got to be, if you're giving me the option, I want to be solid up the middle.
So, Vince, here's the interesting thing. We're kind of assuming that the inside is going to be good.
True.
I don't know that we should definitely do that, though. But that's how good I think the talent is in up the middle. And the fact that I've pointed this out, I'll just quickly repeat it. The two kids that started at guard last year were true juniors, and they struggled. Rocco and Pat. They both struggled for much of the season.
Yep.
Rocco had better moments than Pat, but they both had their issues. Neither of them were good enough last year. You say, well, now your starting center and your starting right guard are true juniors, just like those two kids. Well, here's the difference. Rocco and Pat had 22 career snaps coming into the season. I did not misspeak there. They had 22 career snaps, not starts, snaps coming into last season. Ashton and Billy have about 500, and they have 6 career starts. So it's a very different thing from an experience standpoint, and they're both more talented.
Oh yeah,
than those two guys.
Yes.
But even then, they are still redshirt sophomores who only have 3 starts. There's going to be some inconsistency, and that's really ultimately where I think my concern comes from. It's not that they may be young at tackle. Maybe they may have a redshirt freshman and a redshirt sophomore starting at tackle this year. That very well may happen. The problem that I have is that there's a chance that they may have a redshirt freshman, redshirt sophomore at tackle, and a redshirt sophomore at center, and a redshirt sophomore at guard. And you kind of have to, because that's your best players, and the veterans are not just. I mean, Ty Chan doesn't make you better. Pat Coogan, I don't think makes you better. Like, that's just, you don't have any other older guys. That's who you are. You're young. So the question is going to be then, can those guys come out this season and handle the talent they're going to face up front, but be more consistent than what you normally get from redshirt sophomores?
Right.
And that ultimately is the thing. And if they are inconsistent, my hope is that those inconsistent games happen against Miami of Ohio, Northern Illinois, Navy,
absolutely,
games like that, and that they are at their best in the bigger games. I don't know if that's going to be the case, but that's what you hope for. But you have to prepare yourself for the fact that this season there is going to be some ups and downs. And that, I mean, you've got an elite talent at left tackle. It's going to have his ups and downs. You could end up with an elite talent at right tackle. There's 2-3 guys that can end up being there that are just talent-wise have elite talent. You're going to have outstanding talent at center and right guard, but it's all young, and it's all unproven. And that's where, at the end of the day, I have a level of confidence with this offensive line that at times is going to be really good, but you have to prepare yourself that there's going to be some ups and downs. And that doesn't mean Joe Rudolph's a bad coach. I mean, he inherited a situation where the young recruiting was really good, but there was a gap there in between where it wasn't quite as good.
Right.
And Notre Dame made a choice. They chose to take a third-year starter, 6-year senior, told him to walk. That was a choice they made.
That's true.
Because you could say, look, if they'd have brought Zeke Carrell back, maybe you could slide Ashton Craig over to left guard, and now you're really cooking.
Yeah.
They made the choice to tell Zeke to walk.
So they have confidence.
Wrong choice.
They have confidence that,
Look, I'm going to say this. If your center or left guard struggle this year, it's a bad choice. Because, again, if you brought Zeke back, you could have kept Zeke at center and moved Ashton Craig over to guard.
Yeah, and been fine.
Yeah.
Would have been fine.
So that's the thing, Vince. You got to live with this choice.
Yeah.
And it better work out. But
it does give me confidence, though, that they were able to make that choice.
Vince, I'll lead you into this. the confidence doesn't come from what we saw in practice alone. The confidence came from the minute they put Ashton Craig on the field. He handled the job.
Yes.
And handled it pretty well.
Yeah, they have actual evidence that he can handle the position. And look, again, I love what Zeke was able to bring to the team. I think he did yeoman's work at center for Notre Dame. He did a good job with the hand that he was dealt. And he's going to go start for an ACC team. If I'm not mistaken, he's at NC State, right? He's going to go start, and he's going to do his thing, and it's going to be great.
Preseason top 15, 20
right.
team.
It's going to be great for him. And I'm glad that he found a soft landing spot. But Ashton Craig is a better player right now in 2024, in my opinion, based on what I saw on the field. And that is echoed by what the coaches saw on the field in the 3 starts that he had. I mean, it's not just a practice thing. It is an in-the-game thing. He's longer. He's taller. He's more athletic, stronger. I mean, it is what it is. And so they made that choice. And you're right. I didn't even think about the fact that making that choice also is kind of an indirect sign of approval for whoever wins the left guard spot.
Or a lack of foresight. It's one of the two.
Well, that's true.
It could be a lack of
look at it that way,
but
you're
looked
right.
at it at center and said, well, it's time to put Ashton in there. Okay. Yeah.
That's a good point. Good point. It's definitely a possibility.
Because Ashton didn't come to Notre Dame as a center. He was a tackle in high school.
Yes, he was. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but that's the thing is what we talked earlier about. You know, somebody's got to step up and be a star. Is it Ashton? Is it Billy? You know, but I think those are probably my top 2 options, Vince,
Agreed.
for this season. 2025, I'll have a lot more options,
Yes.
right?
Because you're going to have a lot of starts.
It's going to be Emil, maybe Gerby, maybe Sully, you know, Billy, Ashton. I mean, you're going to have a lot of talent that's now experienced. We're not having the same but conversation next year.
No.
It's going to be talented guys. And that's the exciting thing about the future of the offensive line is once Coogan and Rocco are gone, it's no longer a conversation about, okay, well, which flawed veteran do you go with? And that's a little rude because I actually think Rocco has ability. I think Rocco, with a year of starting under his belt, has a chance to be a much better player if they give him that opportunity.
Sure.
But, you know, like moving forward, it's like, okay, which dude do we want to start? Is it Absher? Is it Jagasol, Gerby Lambert, Sam Pendleton, you know, Peter Jones, Styles Prescott, Anthony Knapp looked really good this spring. I mean, which dude do you want to throw out there? Joe Otting, you know, like which Will Black, Owen Strebig, Matty Augustine, you know, like the talent level is incredibly, incredibly talented or high in the younger classes.
Yes.
So like this is the last year that I expect, barring some craziness of that happening. And in Notre Dame's defense, you don't often recruit 2 offensive tackles from the same class and think they're both going to go pro after their true junior season. Like that just doesn't happen very often.
Right.
And that's what I mean. Even Quentin Nelson came back for his senior year. Joe shouldn't have come back. I mean, I know that he would have been even better next year if he stayed. He's a top 5 pick. Blake flat out should have come back and been more refocused. Because if Blake Fisher comes back and he was focused on being the guy, we'd be having a much, much, much different conversation right now about the Notre Dame offensive line.
Right.
Much different conversation.
And there wouldn't be as much of a gap from the old guys to the young, you know what I mean? Like those guys were just really good and they left early. There are some guys that you recruit and we're like, yeah, he's probably going to be a 3-year player. But most of the time, especially at offensive line, you're thinking this guy's going to be a 4 or a 5-year player. I mean, that's been the route for most offensive linemen. It is completely out of the norm for a guy to come in and play only 3 years, and you had 2 in the same class that did it. That does mess up your recruiting a little bit. Now, they knew that this was coming with Joe probably a year and a half ago, and they started, you know, and they were recruit, but those are still going to be young guys. You can't go back in a time machine and recruit more guys in his class, you know, to fill in that gap. Like it's
like you did too good of a job of developing them. Darn you.
I know,
what I mean? Like they were too good.
Yeah. That's the game you play. You know what I mean? And so they loaded up with the younger guys, and now you've got a mess of younger guys who have a ton of talent and only so many positions to play. I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
The problem is the 2020 class only had 2 kids in it, and one of them left.
Yes, that's part. Yeah,
Michael Carmody. I mean, Zach Zinner they passed on. Like there's some guys in that class. You're like, God, I cannot believe they passed on that guy.
Right.
And then just what Roger Rosengarten they passed on. I mean, it was not a lot of smart decisions in that recruiting class, in my opinion.
Sure.
So it is what it is. And then Michael Carmody, his injury history is a problem too. Like Michael Carmody might be starting for this team if he hadn't had all those injuries. He's good. He's a talented young football player. I didn't think he was a left tackle. Like he has the demeanor of a right tackle or a guard to me. But so there's some bad luck there too. But the point is, Vince, end of the day, as we wrap this up, it's a very talented offensive line.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very deep offensive line. It's also a very inexperienced and young offensive line.
Yes.
At the end of the day, which one of those two things is more of a factor on their play? Is it the talent and the depth or the lack of experience? And the guy at the center of that's going to kind of swing the pendulum one way or the other is Joe Rudolph, right? I think Mike Denbrock's a rival. If Mike Denbrock controls the emphasis of the run game and not Joe Rudolph, that's going to make Joe Rudolph a better line coach, and it's going to make this offensive line better.
Mm-hmm.
Because Mike Denbrock at the heart of it is an inside-outside zone guy. And if you go back and watch the last 2 games of the regular season, especially the Stanford game, they didn't run a whole lot of stuff. They just pretty much ran right at Stanford and just said, kick their butts, and that's what they did. They didn't run a ton of pin and pull stuff in those games. They didn't run a ton of pin and pull stuff in the bowl game. It's just, we're young, we don't know what we're doing, but we're talented, we're just going to go right at them. And they dominated last 2 games, right? I mean, again, inferior opponents, you get all that. Doesn't mean you're going to go dominate Shamar Turner, Nick Scowerton, and Shamar Stewart and all that. I get that. It's not the point. The point is, if you simplify the offense, the run game more, and not all the crazy pin and pull stuff that they were doing like constantly last year, just let these kids play vertical, that's going to help a lot.
Yeah.
And that's why I say if the offense is built around what Mike Denbrock wants to do, then I think that makes the offensive line a lot better.
Agreed.
If they're trying to do a lot of the intricate gap stuff, pin and pull stuff, then that's going to create a lot of problems for this offensive line.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the final fact. That's why I say the guy at the center of this, if this offensive line is really good at the end of the year, hats off to Joe Rudolph. I'm going to give him all the praise in the world. If the offensive line struggles this year, honestly, I'm going to say, I don't know if you have the right guy developing it. It's not the end all be all, but it makes me at least start to ask that question.
Sure. So, I mean, it's year 2. It's year 2, right? And so there is some time, but with the inexperience that is coming through, and they've kind of grown up, quote unquote, as college football players with you, then their performance reflects you. I mean, it is what it is, right? And so that's going to be the interesting part for sure. But then also the Mike Denbrock piece is hugely important. Hugely important to this whole thing. So, I agree.
I'm trying to remember the quote from Remember the Titans.
Oh, I got this. What do you got? What do you got?
Where he talks about attitude reflects leadership. Remember that?
Yes. Yeah.
That quote that Julius said to Gary. I think it was in the woods.
It was after practice. It was after practice, and they were doing 2-a-days at the camp. Yep, at Gettysburg.
Right.
Yeah.
And they were stopped in the woods on that run. Right. And
it was after a practice. It was after,
and Gary says, like, you got your attitude's all wrong.
Yeah.
And Julius says, like, attitude reflects leadership. Right.
Captain.
Sarcastically.
Yeah.
Like, that is so like this line, like the attitude of this line. Do they play with fire? Do they play with physical? Do they want to beat the crap out of their opponent? When I watched that 2015 offensive line and the 2017 offensive line and the 2020 offensive line, when that team played, they wanted to not just do their job, they wanted to dominate you. They wanted to take your soul.
Yes.
And a lot of games in 2017, that's exactly what they did. I don't expect this offensive line to be nearly as good as that line because they don't have the experience, but they're similar in style. They're big, they're physical, there's maulers in there, there's some athletes in there. But do they play with the type of ferocity that last year's offensive line lacked even when they were good?
Right.
That's the thing is that because of the same issues of just you've got a new coach and there's learning and there's veterans that aren't – who knows? But it's up to Joe Rudolph to make sure that whatever the reason was last year is irrelevant. Fix it.
Right.
Unit has to play mean. They have to be physical. When I say mean, I don't mean you're taking cheap shots and you're knocking guys over and then getting there. I'm talking about mean and like I want to dominate you. And you know what I love about offensive linemen? Like Quentin Nelson would pancake a guy and then help him up. Like to me, that's almost like worse than you getting in my face.
Right.
Like
right.
It's gonna be a long day.
Yeah.
Like because he's not even mad. He just does that normally. Like this is gonna be a long day.
Right.
Like, then between the whistles, just play with a physicality and a ferocity and an aggressiveness and a physicality that we did not see last year. And it's not just because, I love offensive linemen that play that way. I mean, that's kind of true, but it fits what the skill sets of this group is. And that's ultimately going to be what it comes down to. Those things, talent, athleticism, size, attitude, demeanor, can overcome a lack of experience if those things are good enough.
Sure.
I know the talent's good enough. The athleticism is good enough. The size is good enough. Is the demeanor, is the emphasis on doing it the right way, is that good enough?
Right.
Last year, the answer is an emphatic no. Does that change in 2024? That ultimately, Vince, it could be the one singular greatest question about this Notre Dame football team for 2024. There's a lot of things we know about this team, or we can assume about this team.
Sure.
That right there is the one thing I don't know the answer to. But when we find it out, it's going to, at the end of the day, be what tells us how good this team is or isn't.
I think that's a great place to end it. So that's going to do it for our offensive line chat going into the 24 season. As a reminder, what is it? Next week starts fall camp, Brian Driscoll. Next week.
Wednesday.
So it's right around the corner. We're like 7.5 days away. It's coming. And so we're going to do our best to get our position previews out. It's going to bleed over, past the 31st a little bit, but that's okay because we don't get any full practices after the first day anyway. So we'll be able to continue talking about this team and what we're hearing and all of those different things. And really looking forward to that. But so thanks for hanging out for this edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Make sure you hit the like button, the subscribe button, that notification bell, share with your family and friends.
Tomorrow, tight ends, buy, sell, hold.
Beautiful. So get those. So, hey, again, if you want to be a part of the buy, sell, hold, boards.irishbreakdown.com. It's right there along the bottom. You've got to be a premium message board subscriber. You get in there, you put your buy, sell, hold question in. We use it in the show. It's just that simple, but it's for the members. Okay. So you got to be part of it. We want you to be part of it. Okay. So that's tomorrow. Jump on the boards, boards.irishbreakdown.com. Get your questions in. And we'll have a lot of fun tomorrow. So offensive line today, tight ends tomorrow. Looking forward to it. Make sure you tune in tonight, 5 o'clock, for IB Nation Sports Talk. No idea what they're talking about, but I'm sure it'll be great. So for Brian, I'm Vince. We'll talk to you next time on the Irish Breakdown